The sound started 7 days before the end. A low, industrial grumble that vibrated through the floorboards of my bedroom, up the legs of my desk. I pressed my fingers to the textbook, trying to feel the words, but the vibration blurred them. Outside, another truck, a semi-truck, this time. Its brakes hissed, long, tired sigh. This was the fourth one this week. I pushed my chair back and went to the window. The house next door belonged to Ethan. He'd moved in 6 months ago. Quiet guy, worked in an office downtown, I think. We'd exchanged maybe a dozen words in total. Nods across the lawn, a mumbled, hey, when we both got the mail. Now, his front yard was a staging ground. Pallets of canned food, towering stacks of bottled water, fat plastic-wrapped bundles of what looked like MREs. 2 men in dirty work shirts were using a forklift to unload it all into his open garage. He's at it again, my mother's voice came from the doorway. She held 2 mugs of tea. Your father says the man's lost his job and now he's lost his mind. She set 1 mug on my desk. The steam smelled like chamomile. I took a sip. It didn't calm the unease twisting in my gut. Through the window, Ethan was directing the workers. He moved with a purpose I'd never seen in him. No hesitation. He pointed, they moved. It was efficient. It was strange. They say he sold his parents' old house in the country, my dad added, walking past the door. He didn't even look in. Poured it all into this. He made a vague gesture that encompassed the mountain of supplies. The WA is going to have a field day. I just watched as they carted away cases of shotgun shells, boxes of medical supplies that looked like they belonged in a field hospital, and long, dark green drums of fuel. The internet said it was a fad. Doomsday prepping, a hobby for people with too much time and anxiety. Twitter was full of jokes. Reddit had threads mocking them. News anchors chuckled and told everyone to remain calm, that supply chains were robust. There were whispers, dark little posts on obscure forums about odd, violent attacks. A man in Miami biting a police officer. A story from rural France about a farm family found torn apart. The posts vanished as quickly as they appeared. Fake news. Hysteria. That night, the sky lit up. Not with lightning. It was a shower of green and violet streaks, a silent, beautiful cascade that painted the clouds. Everyone was outside, phones held up to the sky. It was on every news channel. A once-in-a-lifetime meteor shower. I stood on our back porch, watching the strange colors dance. There was a weird charge in the air, a metallic taste at the back of my throat. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache. When I saw Ethan in his yard, he seemed different. Sharper. He paused, mid-stride, and looked toward my house. Not at the house, but at me, through the window. It was for a split second. His eyes were cold, clear. He wasn't looking at a neighbor. It felt like he was looking at something already gone. I pulled the curtain shut, my heart thumping against my ribs. The next few days were a blur of deliveries and noise. A team of contractors arrived. They didn't build, they fortified. They lined the top of his high brick fence with rolls of concertina wire, the steel barbs winking in the sun. They installed heavy-duty steel shutters over his windows. A truck with a solar company's logo spent a whole day on his roof, covering every available inch with black panels. The low hum of a powerful generator being tested became the new background noise of our quiet cul-de-sac. My manager from the coffee shop, Dave, called me. Hey, Anna, you seeing what's going on with your neighbor? The one who used to work with my cousin at Sterling Corp. It's hard to miss, I said, looking at a delivery of what had to be 1,000 rolls of toilet paper. Yeah, Mark said he just up and quit. Cashed out his 401k. Said something about a paradigm shift. Freaking weirdo. Mark and the guys at the office are taking bets on how long until he comes crawling back, begging for his job. I didn't say anything. I just watched a forklift place a massive, multi-stage water filtration system next to Ethan's garage. It was bigger than my car. A paradigm shift. The phrase echoed in my head. My parents' disapproval grew with each delivery. It's an eyesore, my father grumbled at dinner, sawing into his steak. Making the whole neighborhood look like a crackpot compound. What a waste. All that money. He could have invested it. Bought a rental property. Patricia from down the street said he maxed out a dozen credit cards. My mother added, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. Payday loans, too. Ruining his life over some internet fantasy. I pushed peas around my plate. Later that night, I was at my window again. I couldn't help it. The light in his house was on. He was alone now, organizing. I saw him through his kitchen window before the new steel shutter was lowered. He was stacking cans, methodical, unhurried. He paused and looked down at his phone. Then, he looked up, straight at my window again. This time a small, cold smile touched his lips. It wasn't friendly, it was knowing, it was full of pity. My blood went cold. I backed away from the window and sat on my bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. The world outside felt normal. Kids were riding bikes. I could hear the distant jingle of an ice cream truck. My medical school finals were in less than a week. I had to study immunology. I had to memorize nerve pathways. That was my reality, not this, not the silent, methodical preparation for the end of the world happening 50 feet away. On a study break, I scrolled through Reddit. The science forums were buzzing. The official explanation for the meteor shower was ice crystals in the upper atmosphere reacting with metallic dust. But amateur astronomers were posting their own data. Spectrographic analysis showed compounds that didn't match any known element. One viral thread, titled Panspermia Event, hypothesized the meteors had carried extraterrestrial microorganisms. The comments were a war between sober-minded scientists debunking it and frantic believers posting links to the now-deleted news stories about the biting attacks. I closed the app. My hand was shaking. I saw glimpses of the other lives that were about to end. The TV in the living room showed a business news segment. Serena Manning, the CEO of some tech giant, was announcing a record-breaking quarter, her smile sharp and confident. Local news ran a piece on the police department's new special response team completing a rigorous anti-terror drill. They showed a photo of the team. One woman, a hawk-faced officer named Jasmine Kylo, stared into the camera with an intensity that burned. They were all living their lives, hitting their targets, planning their futures. Just like me, just like my parents. It is now 3 days before the end. The deliveries have stopped. The construction is done. Ethan's house is a fortress. It's quiet. The silence is worse than the noise. I'm in my room, trying to force my brain to absorb information about the Krebs cycle, when a new vehicle pulls into his driveway. It's not a commercial truck. It's a plain, windowless white van. The kind that makes you hold your keys a little tighter in a parking lot. It's almost midnight. No streetlights reach that part of his driveway. Ethan comes out of his side door. He doesn't turn on any outdoor lights. 2 large men get out of the van. They don't speak. The back doors of the van swing open. They begin to unload long, heavy-looking cases. Hard-sided, black plastic. The kind you see in movies, the kind that hold sniper rifles. There are smaller, square cases, too. Ammunition cans. The men move with a practiced silence, their movements economical and dark. I can't hear their footsteps, only the soft scrape of the cases on the concrete and the solid, metallic thunk as they're placed inside the garage. One of the men drops a case. The sound is not loud, but it cuts through the night. A heavy, clattering crash of metal on metal. My breath catches in my throat. My father yells from his bedroom down the hall, "What in God's name was that?" I don't answer. I am frozen at the window, a statue made of ice. Ethan doesn't flinch. He just points at the dropped case, then points inside the garage. A silent order. The man picks it up. They finish unloading. They slide the heavy garage door down. It closes with a final, deep boom that echoes in the quiet street. The van drives away without its headlights on, a ghost slipping back into the night. Ethan's house is dark again. A black cube of concrete and steel. A tomb. I stay at the window for a long time, staring into the darkness where the van used to be. The world is still here. My exam is in 3 days. But the ground beneath my feet no longer feels solid. A silent, invisible crack has formed, and I feel like I'm standing on the wrong side of it. Next door, behind a wall of steel and wire, a man is waiting. And I know, with a certainty that makes me sick, that he is not waiting for a job offer. He is waiting for the rest of us to die. The mobile network died at noon. 1 bar, then 0. The Wi-Fi router blinked an amber light, a tiny, pulsing wound in the corner of my living room. I didn't try to fix it. Outside, a thick, unnatural fog rolled in off the coast, swallowing the midday sun and turning the streetlights on. The news, broadcasting on the single emergency channel that still worked, called it a freak weather event. The president came on the television. His face was a mask of strained reassurance. He spoke of unity, of strength, of temporary disruptions. He said the scattered reports of violence were sophisticated deepfakes, psychological warfare from an unnamed adversary, designed to sow panic. He told us to stay calm. I turned the television off. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the low hum of the generator in my garage. My house looked normal from the street, a two-story modern build in a wealthy, secluded suburb, but the windows on the ground floor were no longer glass. Behind the decorative shutters were half-inch thick steel plates I had welded into the frames myself, leaving only thin, horizontal slits for observation. The food was gone from the pantry. The water was gone from the utility room. My savings were gone from the bank. It was all in a place no one could touch. I closed my eyes and focused. It was like flexing a muscle that wasn't in my body. A point of pressure behind my eyes, and the world dissolved. I stood in a gray, featureless space, 50 feet by 50 feet, under a non-existent sky. The air had no temperature, no smell. Time did not pass here. My hoard was organized with obsessive precision. Pallets of MREs, mountains of canned goods, barrels of purified water, drums of gasoline, crates of ammunition. And in the far corner, a metal mountain. The entire contents of Gus's scrap and salvage yard. Buying it had been easy. I walked into Gus's filthy office 2 weeks ago with a duffel bag full of cash. He was a large man, sweat stains on his shirt, grease under his fingernails. "I want to buy the whole yard," I said. He laughed, a wet, hacking sound. "The whole yard? Kid, you shitting me?" I unzipped the bag. The sight of the bundled hundreds shut him up. "What for?" he asked, his eyes wide. "An art project. He sold it to me for a fraction of its scrap value, giddy at his good fortune. He thought I was a fool, a rich kid with more money than sense. He told me to have it cleared out in a week." I waited for him to drive off in his battered pickup, his laughter echoing down the street. Then I walked to the nearest pile of rusted car chassis and twisted metal, laid a hand on it, and flexed that invisible muscle. The 50-ton mountain of steel vanished without a sound, leaving behind a patch of oil-stained dirt. In an hour, the entire 3-acre lot was empty. Standing now in my subspace, I felt a new sensation. A thrumming, a vibration that seemed to originate from inside my own head. A piercing headache flared, and a panel of translucent blue light flickered into existence before my eyes. Multiverse trading system initializing. Host located. Binding complete. Welcome, user. The words were not words. They were concepts, downloaded directly into my brain. I didn't read them, I just knew them. Simultaneously, a cold wave washed through my body, a current of pure dominance. I felt larger. I looked at the pile of scrap metal, and I could feel an oppressive weight, my own will, press down upon it. The mental pressure felt like a physical force. My second new power, a new line of text appeared on the blue screen. It looked like a message board notification. User, Sword Saint Apprentice, martial arts plane. Greater than seeking common metals. Need a large quantity of mortal grade iron for basic forging practice. Willing to trade a novice level cultivation manual. I stared at the message. Mortal grade iron. My eyes drifted to the mountain of rust and ruin I'd bought from Gus. I focused on the image of a single, worn-out truck tire from the pile. A menu appeared next to it. Item: degraded rubber composite, truck tire. Quantity: 1. Item quality: low. I mentally dragged the icon into the trade window. The response was instantaneous. User, Sword Saint Apprentice, martial arts plane. Greater than by the ancestors. What is this material? The flexibility, the resilience. Refined spirit rubber? This is a masterful treasure for crafting shock-absorbing boot soles and non-slip sword grips. A treasure indeed. 1,000 thanks, generous benefactor. The manual is yours. Trade complete. You have received. Manual, iron body technique, novice. A wave of information crashed into my mind. Not words, but pure data. Diagrams of energy flow, techniques for muscle compression, breathing patterns that pulled ambient energy into the body. My body reacted on its own. My skin prickled, my muscles coiled and tightened, becoming denser, harder. I slammed my fist into the side of a rusted van. The metal dented with a loud boom, but my knuckles felt nothing. Not a scratch. A cold smile touched my lips. Another notification pinged. User _magi _ training, arcane plane. Greater than requesting basic conductive materials for golem crafting rune matrix. Simple iron or steel will suffice. Offering 1 basic clay golem in exchange for 20 pounds of material. I focused on a heap of rebar. Item: oxidized steel rods. Quantity: 20 pounds. I made the trade. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the air in my living room warped. Particles of dust and motes of light swirled together, compressing with a low grinding sound, like stone on stone. It rose from the floor, a figure of packed brown earth and clay, featureless and smooth. It stood 8 feet tall, silent and motionless. Its head swiveled, 2 dark hollows for eyes fixing on me. I felt no threat from it, only absolute, unquestioning obedience. It was just a statue, a piece of inventory. Across town, Gus was in a high-end whiskey bar, the kind with dark wood and leather chairs. He'd already had 4 glasses of a 25-year-old single malt he couldn't pronounce. He was telling the story, for the 5th time, to a group of laughing suits. And this kid, this skinny little weirdo, he just hands me a bag of cash and says, "I want it all for an art project." Gus slapped his thigh, his face red with drink and glee. An art project. I took that lil punk for a ride, I tell you. A complete moron. He raised his glass. To morons with deep pockets. I stood in my living room, the cold air from the generator vent washing over my feet. The golem stood in the center of the room, a silent monolith of dirt. In my mind, a manual for hardening my body to the level of steel. I was standing in my house, but I felt like a king surveying his treasury. The scrap heap Gus had laughed at wasn't a pile of trash. It was an interdimensional goldmine. And I was the only one with a key. I pointed at a corner of the back garden, visible through the reinforced slit in the wall. "Go. Stand there. Do not move unless I command it." The golem's legs scraped against the hardwood floor. It moved with a ponderous, silent grace, its weight not making a sound. It opened the sliding glass door, now a sliding steel plate, and stepped outside, positioning itself among the ornamental shrubs. It folded its arms and became perfectly still, indistinguishable from an ugly piece of modern garden sculpture. My first silent, sleepless century. The emergency broadcast channel crackled. A new alert scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Geneva, WHO issues Level 4 global health warning, unidentified influenza-like virus with high transmission rate detected. Public advised to avoid large gatherings. The world was still turning. The machinery of the old world was still grinding along, unaware it was already dead. I knew what was happening to them. Annie D., my former neighbor, a third-year medical student, had just finished her last final. Her phone was dead, but she was at a celebratory dinner with friends, excitedly planning a graduation trip to Cancun. She was smiling. Officer Jasmine Kylo, a hard-faced woman on the city's special response team, felt her pager vibrate. Her whole unit was being activated. The summons was curt. Report to CDC quarantine staging area, LEVEL-5 biohazard protocol enacted. She checked the magazine on her sidearm as her team's armored truck sped through the fog-choked streets. Serena Manning, CEO of a tech giant, was on a corporate jet, halfway across the Pacific. The plane's satellite internet had just gone out. She was annoyed, tapping her pen on a legal pad, unaware that the co-pilot was starting to sweat, his skin taking on a gray, waxy pallor. They were all moving toward the deadline. I walked to the steel-plated front door and engaged the final lock. A 1-inch solid steel deadbolt that sank 6 inches into the reinforced frame with a solid, final chunk. I checked the feed from the external cameras. The fog was now so dense I could see nothing but a milky gray wall. The wall clock on the mantel ticked. 23 hours 59 minutes and 57 seconds. 23 hours 59 minutes and 58 seconds. 23 hours 59 minutes and 59 seconds. 0 hours 0 minutes and 0 seconds. From far away, a sound began. A rising, mournful wail. It was a sound stripped from old war movies and history books. An air raid siren. 1 became 2, then 10. Then a chorus of them, screaming a hymn for the end of a species across the entire city. It was followed, almost immediately, by another sound. Human screams. Thousands of them. The grid went dark at 1:17 a.m. Not a flicker or a brownout. One moment the streetlights were casting sickly yellow pools into the fog, the next they were gone. A universal, instantaneous failure. The only light on my block was mine. It spilled from the narrow slits of my second-story windows, a beacon of defiance in a world that had just been unplugged. The silence that followed was different. The distant sirens had stopped. The chorus of screams had faded into a low, constant background noise, like the sound of the ocean, if the ocean were made of pain. Now, the quiet was filled with smaller things. A dog barking frantically, a sound that ended with a wet yelp. A single gunshot, impossibly loud, from a few streets over. And a new sound, a wet, dragging scrape that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I sat on the Italian leather sofa, the air conditioning whispering across my skin. The 75-inch screen on the wall wasn't showing a movie. It was split into a 16-panel display, a mosaic of my property. The fog outside was thinner now, but it had taken on a faint, reddish tint. It carried a smell through the air filtration system, a coppery, sweet rot. The scent of an abattoir. The power inside my skull felt different, too. Sharper. The world outside my body felt thick with an energy I could now perceive. I stood up and walked to the center of the room. I closed my eyes, recalling the diagrams from the manual. I took a breath, not into my lungs, but pulling it into my skin. The air I inhaled felt coarse, full of grit. My muscles knotted, twisting under my skin like bundles of steel cable. I opened my eyes and punched the concrete support pillar in the middle of my open-plan living room. The sound was a flat, heavy thump. Plaster dust rained down. A web of cracks appeared on the surface. My knuckles were fine, not a mark. The feedback of the impact traveled up my arm, but there was no pain. Just a deep, resonant vibration. The progress was faster, much faster than the manual had suggested. The ambient energy of this broken world was a catalyst. I walked back to the sofa. My work was done, for now. It was time for a meal. In the gray, timeless space inside my head, I walked past the stacks of ammunition and medical supplies. I selected a cut of A5 Wagyu, its fat marbled like a work of art. I took a bundle of fresh asparagus, crisp bok choy, and a handful of shiitake mushrooms. They were all exactly as they were the moment I had acquired them, preserved by the stasis of this dimension. I brought them out. The induction cooktop on my kitchen island hummed to life. The split yin-yang hot pot began to bubble. One side was a rich, savory bone broth. The other was a roiling crimson sea of Szechuan peppers and chili oil. The fragrance filled the air, spicy and complex, a stark contrast to the simple stench of decay from outside. My power came from an independent solar array on the roof, charging a massive battery bank in the garage. The water in the pot came from a multi-stage filtration system that could turn sewer sludge into Evian. I was an island of 21st century comfort in a 14th century plague. A sudden, violent banging erupted from the front door. Bam, 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 it was the sound of a fist hitting reinforced steel. I didn't flinch. I picked up a thin slice of beef with my chopsticks, its red and white pattern a perfect miniature landscape. On the main monitor, I switched the display to the front porch camera. Mr. D, the accountant from 2 houses down, was hammering on my door. His face was blotchy, his eyes wild with terror. His golf shirt was torn at the shoulder. Beside him, his son, a college kid named Brent, was shifting his weight from foot to foot, holding a baseball bat like a talisman. "Alex, open the goddamn door." Mr. D's voice was a ragged shout, distorted by the camera's cheap microphone. "We know you're in there. We saw you. All that shit you were hoarding. You have to share. It's the right thing to do. For God's sake, we're neighbors." I watched them. I watched the desperation crawl over their faces. I remembered Mr. D laughing at me over the fence last month as I unloaded another pallet of canned food. "Getting ready for the big one, Alex?" he had called out, a smug grin on his face. "Don't forget the tinfoil hat." I leaned forward and pressed the talk button on the intercom panel beside the sofa. My voice, calm and amplified, boomed out from the speaker by the door. "Get lost." I released the button. The connection cut with a click. Mr. D stared at the speaker, his mouth hanging open. Disbelief warred with fury in his eyes. "You son of a bitch," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "You can't do this. You inhuman bastard. We'll die out here." I ignored him. I dipped the slice of Wagyu into the boiling chili broth. 1, 2, 3 seconds. I pulled it out, perfectly cooked, glistening with fragrant oil. I brought it to my mouth. On the screen, a new figure entered the frame. It shuffled out of the red fog. A woman in a ripped nightgown, her jaw hanging at an unnatural angle. One of her arms was missing at the elbow. She moved with a twitching, bird-like gait, her head cocked. She wasn't running. She wasn't threatening. She was just coming. Brent saw her first. "Dad." The word was a choked gasp. Mr. D spun around. The sight of the woman froze him for a half second. Then he shoved his son behind him and hefted a large rock from the decorative garden bed. Get back, get the hell back. The woman kept coming, making a low, wet, clicking sound in her throat. I placed the warm, tender beef on my tongue. The explosion of flavor, the rich fat, the searing heat of the chili, was sublime. I chewed slowly, savoring it. I could hear the faint, frantic shouts from outside, but they were a world away. I picked up a piece of bok choy and dipped it into the bone broth. On the screen, Mr. D threw the rock. It hit the woman in the chest with a dull thud. She stumbled but did not stop. He backed away, pulling his son toward the relative darkness of the street. She followed, her pace unchanged. A predator that didn't need to hurry. The last I saw of them was Brent tripping over the curb before his father hauled him back to his feet and they disappeared into the fog. I took a slow sip of the broth from my spoon. It was warm and comforting. A perfect meal. I finished my lunch and flicked through the camera feeds I had managed to hack into before the net went down. A traffic cam at a downtown intersection showed a scene of utter collapse. An M1 Abrams tank sat inert in the middle of the road, its surface swarmed. Dozens of the infected clawed at its metal skin, a tide of bodies trying to erode a mountain of steel. One of them was on top, mindlessly ripping at the commander's hatch with its bare hands. The symbol of the old world's power, reduced to a piece of scenery. I thought of the others. Annie, the medical student. She was Mr. D's daughter. She was in that house, hearing her father and brother fail, feeling the walls close in. Jasmine Kylo, the cop. She and her unit were probably barricaded in some precinct, supplies dwindling, surrounded. Serena Manning, the CEO, trapped at the international airport with 10,000 other panicked, important people stripped of their importance. A 5-star general and a janitor were now equals. They were all caught in the gears. The golem stood motionless in the back garden, a lump of silent clay in obedience. My first soldier. It was perfect. It felt no fear. It needed no food. It would follow any order without question. Outside my reinforced walls, humanity was eating itself. Inside, I was planning my expansion. A sound. It was different from the banging or the shouting. It was a sharp, metallic scrape from the rear of the property. The back fence. I toggled the display. Camera 12. The image was grainy in the low light. 3 figures. They weren't shambling. They moved with purpose, crouched low. One of them was using a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters on the chain link fence I hadn't gotten around to replacing yet. They weren't the desperate, panicked sheep like the D's. They were wolves who had smelled a well-stocked sheepfold. One of them looked up, directly at the camera hidden in the eaves of the roof. He couldn't see me, but he grinned, a flash of white teeth in the gloom. He knew someone was watching. And he didn't care. I watched him on the screen. I took another bite of mushroom. The hunt was coming to me. The grin on the screen was a slash of white in the grainy dark. The man holding the bolt cutters looked straight into the camera lens. He knew. It wasn't a guess. He pointed a finger at the lens, then drew it across his throat. The gesture was slow, deliberate. A promise. I didn't move from the sofa. The last of the hot pot broth was cooling in my bowl. The rich, fatty flavor still coated my tongue. On the screen, the man severed the last link of the chain. The fence gate swung inward with a soft groan. He and his 2 companions slipped through the opening. They moved like water, low to the ground, fanning out across the back lawn. One of them produced a small, dark object and pointed it at the camera. The feed for camera 12 went to static with a sharp pop. Silence from the back of the house. I toggled through the other feeds. Nothing. They were good. They were patient, not like Mr. D and his son, blundering through the fog like frightened cattle. These were wolves. A soft chime sounded in my head, a notification only I could hear. Trade request accepted. Tien Heap World 7B. Debiting. 1 case, 12 MREs, beef stew. Crediting. 1 vial, 10, Tin Tui Dan, water purification pills. In the sterile dimensional space, one of the many cardboard boxes of military-grade rations vanished. In its place, a small porcelain vial appeared on a mental shelf. It was cool to the touch, smooth as polished riverstone. Each pill inside could turn 1,000 gallons of the filthiest water into something purer than anything that ever came from a tap. The water filtration system in the garage was a marvel of engineering, but it was still a machine. It had parts that could break. This vial was insurance. This was certainty. A heavy thud came from the front of the house. It wasn't a fist. It was the sound of a boot kicking the reinforced steel door. "Hey, asshole." The voice was rough, loud, and full of gravel. It carried easily through the insulated walls. "We know you're in there. Saw the lights. Saw the truck out back." I switched the primary monitor to the front porch camera. There were more of them now. 7 in total. The one who had cut the fence lock was there, leaning against the porch rail, cleaning his fingernails with the tip of a knife. The man yelling was bigger, barrel-chested, with a mess of tattoos crawling up his neck and onto his face. A crude spiderweb was inked over his left temple. He wore a heavy leather vest over a hoodie, despite the clammy air. He was the leader. "Got a real nice setup here," the leader yelled again, gesturing around the manicured porch. "Too nice for one person. We're the new neighborhood watch. We're here to collect a tax. Food, water, medicine. You give us what we want, and we'll protect you." He chuckled, a low, ugly sound. "You don't, and we come in and take it anyway. Your choice. Make it easy on yourself." They fanned out, their body language loose and confident. One of them picked up a ceramic garden gnome and smashed it against the brick steps. They laughed. They thought they were laying siege to a fortress held by a coward. They saw the lights, the clean walls, the order, and assumed the owner was soft. Someone who had gotten lucky. I placed my empty bowl on the coffee table. I didn't reach for the intercom. I didn't need to speak to them. Words were a currency for negotiating with people you considered equals. These were not people. They were pests. My gaze drifted to the monitor showing the back garden. The golem stood where I had left it, near the rose bushes. A 2-meter-tall statue of packed earth and clay, indistinguishable from a piece of modern art to the untrained eye. It was inert, a silent, unmoving sentinel. I focused on it. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. The command was a sliver of intent, a direct order pushed from my mind to its rudimentary consciousness. "Clean up the trash." In the back garden, the statue's head tilted. It wasn't a human movement. It was the grinding of stone on stone. It took a step. The ground vibrated faintly. It took another, its heavy, flat feet thudding against the flagstone patio. It did not hurry. It moved with the implacable force of a glacier. On the front porch, the men heard it. The laughter stopped. "What the hell was that?" one of them asked, looking back towards the side of the house. The leader, Spike, spat on the ground. "Probably a big dog. Go check it out, Mikey." A skinny man holding a length of rebar detached himself from the group and edged cautiously toward the corner of the house. He peeked around the edge. His eyes went wide. For a second, he just stood there, his mouth hanging open. "Spike," he whispered, "you gotta see this." The golem stepped into view, rounding the corner and emerging into the weak, filtered light of the front yard. It paid no attention to Mikey. Its featureless head was fixed on the main group on the porch. The men stared, their bravado evaporating. "The fuck is that thing?" another one stammered, raising a rusty machete. Spike recovered first. A sneer twisted his lips. "Just some kinda Halloween decoration. Look at it. It's made of mud." He pulled a handgun from the back of his jeans, a big, clumsy-looking revolver. He aimed and fired. The crack of the gunshot was loud. A small puff of dust erupted from the golem's chest where the bullet hit. The creature didn't slow down. It didn't even register the impact. That was a mistake. Firing the gun was a mistake. It broke the spell of disbelief and replaced it with a surge of panicked aggression. "Shoot it! Light it up!" Spike roared. 2 other handguns appeared. Muzzle flashes lit up the gloom. Bullets whined and sparked against the golem's body, chipping off small fragments of dried clay and winding off into the fog. It was like throwing pebbles at a bulldozer. The golem continued its advance, each footstep a heavy, rhythmic thump. Thump, thump. The man with the machete charged forward, screaming. He swung his blade in a wide arc, aiming for the golem's head. There was a loud, metallic clang as the steel met the magically hardened clay. The machete was ripped from the man's grasp, his hands stinging. The golem's arm, a limb of solid earth the thickness of a telephone pole, swung in a casual backhand motion. It connected with the man's chest. The sound was not a crack of bone. It was a wet, heavy, percussive thump, like a side of beef being dropped onto concrete. The man flew backward, not forward. He tumbled through the air, limp as a rag doll, and crashed through the wooden porch railing before landing in a heap in the azalea bushes. He didn't move. The shooting stopped. The remaining men, including Spike, just stared. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and fear. The golem ascended the 2 steps onto the porch. It ignored the man it had just thrown. It kept its featureless face locked on the leader. Spike's face was pale. The spiderweb tattoo stood out starkly against his skin. He backed away, stumbling over the broken garden gnome. Stay back. I'm telling you, stay the hell back. The golem did not stay back. It reached for him. Spike shrieked and fired his revolver again, point blank. The bullets ricocheted harmlessly. Its huge, 5-fingered hand, each digit a thick block of clay, closed around Spike's head. There was no sound of a skull crushing. There was just the motion. The golem lifted him off the ground as easily as I would lift my empty bowl. Spike's legs kicked uselessly in the air. His hands beat against the golem's unyielding arm. Then, with the same casual force it had used moments before, the golem slammed him down onto the brick porch. The sound was obscene, a sharp, snapping crack mixed with a sound like a watermelon being dropped from a great height. Spike's body went rigid for a moment, then flopped. An unnatural angle formed in his neck. A dark pool began to spread rapidly from under his head. The wolves had found a dragon's den. For a heartbeat, the remaining 4 men were frozen. The man at the corner, Mikey, was the first to break. He dropped his rebar with a clatter and ran. He didn't scream, he just ran, his feet pounding on the asphalt as he vanished into the red-tinged fog. His flight broke the dam. The other 3 turned and scrambled off the porch, tripping over each other in their haste to escape. They fled in different directions, disappearing into the suburban maze like the cockroaches they were. The golem stood over Spike's body for a moment, then, its task complete, it turned and began its heavy, thudding walk back to its post in the rear garden. It left a single, muddy footprint in the growing pool of blood. I watched it all on the screen. I felt nothing, no satisfaction, no pity. It was a simple equation. A problem had presented itself, and it had been solved. Efficiently, I switched the display to a camera I had aimed at the street. It gave me a clear view of the house across from mine. Mr. D's house. I zoomed in on a second-story window. The curtain was pulled back just an inch. In the sliver of darkness, I could see a face. Annie, the medical student. She wasn't looking at the porch, at the body. She was looking at exactly where my window was. She couldn't see me through the tinted, reinforced glass, but she was looking right at me. Her expression wasn't fear or disgust, not like I had seen in her father's eyes. It was something else, a deep, unsettling comprehension. The look of someone who has just seen the true nature of the world, and the monster who thrived in it. The body on the porch was a liability. It would attract flies, then worse things. I sent another command. The golem, which had just settled back into its motionless pose among the roses, stirred once more. It trudged back to the front, grabbed Spike's corpse by the ankle, and began dragging it down the driveway towards the street. It left a wide, dark smear on the concrete. It would deposit the body a few houses down. Out of sight, out of mind. The infected or the wild animals could have it. A form of recycling. I stood and walked to the kitchen island. My resources were vast, but finite. The MRE trade was a good one, but it highlighted a problem. I was consuming my initial stockpile. To get the best things from other worlds, I needed to trade things from this one. The more useless the junk, the better. Broken electronics, scrap metal, old tires. A world in ruins was a treasure chest. I needed to go out. The first trip wouldn't be far. Just a few blocks away was a large supermarket. In the chaos of the first day, it would have been looted, a battlefield for the desperate. But now, 3 days in, the initial wave of scavengers would be dead or gone. The place would be quiet, picked over, but full of the kind of high-volume, low-value debris that was worthless to starving survivors, but pure gold to me. The hunt was over. It was time to start gathering. The body left a black smear on the concrete driveway. The golem dragged it by an ankle, its heavy tread untroubled by the dead weight. It deposited the corpse 2 houses down, behind a hedge of overgrown boxwoods, then plodded back to its post in the garden. Recycling. The world was full of new cycles now. Inside, I watched the screen until the golem became a statue again. The red-tinged fog from the first few days had thinned into a permanent, greasy gray that smothered the sun. The lights in my house were an offense against the new order of things. A soft chime in my head. A mental flicker. I called up the interface. A broken smartphone, its screen a spiderweb of cracks, sat on a mental shelf. It was one of a dozen I had collected before the world ended, Bought for pennies from a repair shop. Worthless. Initiate trade? Searching available worlds for compatible recipient. Match found. Sci-Fi World 14G. A scavenger tech on a junk planet requires pre-singularity processing units for a retro build. Offer received. 1X Model 7 solar-charged laser sidearm. Battery at 12% capacity. Charges in any ambient light. I accepted. The broken phone vanished. In its place, a weapon materialized. It was matte black polymer, unnaturally light. There was no slide, no ejection port, no magazine well. Just a seamless grip that fit my hand and a small, recessed lens at the front. A row of tiny indicator lights glowed a faint amber. 12%. It would have to do. The gray light filtering through the window was enough. It would charge. Slowly, I holstered it in a simple canvas pouch on my belt and went to the garage. The SUV was a black block of reinforced steel and polycarbonate. I'd spent a month's salary on the modifications before everything went down. People at work thought I was a paranoid lunatic. Now they were just meat. I checked the tires. I ran a diagnostic on the water purifier I'd installed in the back. Everything was green. I drove out. The electric motor was a low hum against the silence. The world outside the armored windows was a static image of decay. Houses with doors hanging open like mouths. Cars abandoned mid-turn, some burned out, others just sitting. I saw movement in a side yard, a small pack of the infected, shuffling in a loose circle, drawn to something I couldn't see. I didn't slow down. They weren't my problem. The supermarket was less than a mile away. Its massive parking lot was a graveyard of shopping carts and vehicles. The glass doors had been shattered. The first few aisles were a disaster zone, picked clean of anything edible. Rotting produce made the air thick and sweet. Cans and boxes littered the floor, their contents spilled and trampled. This was what I came for. I ignored an aisle with a few remaining dusty cans of beans. I bypassed the pharmacy, already stripped bare. I went straight to the hardware and electronics sections. I grabbed power drills, old televisions, stacks of copper wire, anything heavy with metal and complex parts. I filled 2 large plastic totes, the weight of them satisfying in my arms. This was currency. This was power. As I was hauling the second tote toward the entrance, I heard it. A single gunshot. A crack that echoed through the vast, empty store. It came from the back, from the loading bay and warehouse area. A pause. Then another shot. Then a different sound. A low, guttural snarl that wasn't human and wasn't infected. It was the sound of a predator. Curiosity was a liability, but information was an asset. I left the totes near the door and drew the laser pistol. Its weight was nothing. I moved down the main aisle, my boots crunching on broken glass. The smell of rot gave way to the sharp, coppery scent of fresh blood and cordite. A set of double doors leading to the stockroom was propped open with a fire extinguisher. I peered through the gap. The warehouse was cavernous. Metal shelves rose 3 stories high, most of them empty. In the center of the concrete floor, a woman was fighting for her life. She wore the black tactical gear of a SWAT officer, but her helmet was gone and a deep gash bled freely on her forehead, matting her dark hair. She was encircled. 3 animals, or what used to be animals. They looked like German shepherds, but they were bigger, their muscles bunched and knotted under patchy fur. Their eyes glowed with a feral red light, and saliva dripped from jaws that seemed too large for their skulls. Circling outside the dogs was a pack of a dozen infected, their movements slow but relentless, drawn by the sound and the blood. The officer held a combat knife in a reverse grip. Her handgun was on the floor a few feet away, its slide locked back. Empty. She was breathing in harsh, controlled gasps, her eyes darting between the 3 dogs that prowled just outside her knife's reach. They were testing her, waiting for an opening. She was good. She didn't panic. When an infected shambled too close, she moved with fluid economy, a quick pivot and a stab to the base of the skull, her blade withdrawing before the body even hit the floor. But she was tiring. A dark stain of sweat was spreading across the back of her uniform. The dogs knew it. One of them feinted, a low lunge that drew her attention, while another darted in from the side. She spun, barely getting her arm up in time. The dog's jaws clamped down on her forearm. The Kevlar weave of her uniform sleeve held, but the force of the bite threw her off balance. She grunted, a sharp exhalation of pain, and drove the point of her knife into the animal's neck. It yelped and fell back, blood pumping from the wound, but the damage was done. The third dog charged the opening. I stood in the doorway, watching. I didn't move. I saw the clean lines of her defense, the professional calm under the terror. She wasn't some random survivor. She was a weapon, and she was about to be broken. A waste. She was about to die. She kicked the dying dog at the charging one, trying to buy a second. It wasn't enough. I raised the laser pistol. The weapon made no sound as it charged. I centered the lens on the head of the charging dog. A line of red light, thinner than a needle, shot across the warehouse. It was there and gone in the same instant. A perfectly round, cauterized hole appeared in the dog's skull. Its charge faltered. It dropped to the concrete, skidding to a stop a foot from her boots. It didn't twitch. The officer froze. The remaining dog stopped, its head cocked, confused by the silent death of its packmate. I shifted my aim. Another silent flash. The second dog dropped. Then the third, the one she had stabbed, which was trying to get back to its feet. It went down and stayed down. 3 shots. 3 kills. No sound. The circle of infected continued their mindless shuffle forward. The officer stared at the dead dogs, then at the hole in the wall behind them where one of the laser beams had exited. Her face was a mask of confusion and shock. I stepped through the doorway. The zombies turned toward me, a new target. I stooped down and picked up a 3-foot length of steel pipe that had fallen from a shelf. It felt heavy and solid in my hands. The first infected lunged, its mouth open, a low moan coming from its throat. I swung the pipe. The sound it made against the zombie's skull was a wet, compact crunch. The head caved in. The body fell. I didn't stop to admire the work. I stepped over it. The second one came at me. I brought the pipe down in a vertical strike, splitting its skull like a melon. The third got a horizontal swing that shattered its jaw and sent it spinning to the ground. It wasn't a fight. It was manual labor. My arms didn't tire. The rudimentary, hard chi I'd acquired made my body denser, my strikes more powerful than they had any right to be. Within a minute, the remaining infected were just twitching heaps on the floor. Silence returned to the warehouse, broken only by the woman's ragged breathing. I let the pipe drop. It clanged loudly on the concrete. She stood in the center of a circle of corpses, her knife still held at the ready, her knuckles white. She was looking at me, at the strange, toy-like pistol in my hand, at the casual way I had just disposed of a dozen threats that had nearly killed her. "What was that?" she asked. Her voice was steady, trained. A cop's voice. "That gun. A tool," I said. I walked over to the dogs and nudged one with my boot. No reaction. "You're good with a knife." She didn't relax her stance. "You were watching." It wasn't a question. I was assessing the situation. I corrected her. "You were a bad investment. You changed my mind." She finally lowered the knife, but she didn't sheath it. She looked at her arm where the dog had bitten her. Deep indentations were visible in the fabric, and blood was slowly seeping through. "They ambushed us. My team. Where are they?" I asked, already knowing the answer. A bitter smile touched her lips. "Dead. All but one. Henderson." He panicked. A herd was closing in on our position. He opened fire on a propane tank to create a diversion, to draw them away from him. She looked me dead in the eye. And onto us. I was the only one who made it out of the initial blast. Betrayal, the most common currency in this new world. "He's probably dead by now too," I said. It was a statement of probability, not sympathy. "I hope so," she said without heat. We stood there for a moment in the quiet. The smell of blood was heavy. She was an asset, trained, disciplined, and now, without attachments or illusions about human nature. A perfect piece to add to the board. "I have a place," I said, my voice flat. "It's secure. Walls, power, clean water. Food." Her eyes narrowed. In this world, an offer like that was never free. It usually cost you everything. "Why?" "Because you're useful. And you're alone. That makes you predictable." I turned and started walking back toward the front of the store. I didn't look back to see if she was following. The choice was hers. I reached the totes full of scrap metal and electronics. I lifted one, the plastic groaning under the weight. A pair of black combat boots appeared beside me. "My name is Zoe Nash," she said. "Liam," I replied, and hoisted the second tote. "You can carry the pipe." She looked at the bloody piece of steel, then back at me. A flicker of something, doubt, calculation, passed through her eyes. But she bent down and picked it up. "Where are we going?" she asked. Home, I said. The SUV hummed, a low thrum that was the only sound besides the crunch of glass and debris under the tires. The world outside the reinforced windows was gray and motionless. We passed a city bus slewed across 2 lanes, its doors open, a dark shape slumped over the steering wheel. Further on, a playground, the swings moving just slightly in the breeze, chains groaning. There were bodies, some in pieces, some lying as if they had simply fallen asleep on the sidewalk. They were part of the landscape now, like fire hydrants or mailboxes. Beside me, Zoe Nash sat rigid. She held the bloody steel pipe across her lap with both hands. Her knuckles were white. Her eyes didn't look at the carnage outside. They were fixed forward, on the road, but they weren't seeing it. They were seeing a warehouse, an empty handgun, the jaws of a mutated dog. I could smell the dried sweat and old blood on her uniform. It was the smell of the world. I didn't speak. There was nothing to say. Words were for negotiation or for threats. We were past that. The air in the cab, filtered and cool, felt like a violation of the reality outside. A low, almost subsonic frequency emanated from me, a byproduct of my will. It wasn't a command, it was a statement. This space is controlled. This space is stable. I felt the tension in her shoulders lessen by a fraction. Her grip on the pipe did not change, but the rigid line of her jaw softened. A trained animal, sensing a predator that meant it no immediate harm. I drove through the gates of the suburban development. They stood open, one hanging from a single hinge. The manicured lawns were turning brown. We passed a house with a child's bicycle lying on its side. A few more turns and I pulled into the driveway of my villa. The house was dark, unassuming. It looked just like all the others. The engine died. The silence that rushed in was thick with the memory of sound. This is it? Zoe's voice was flat, a cop's voice trying to hide suspicion. This is it. I got out. She followed, the pipe still in her hand like a talisman. I walked to the front door and pressed my thumb to a small, almost invisible panel next to the handle. A soft click echoed from inside, the sound of a deadbolt retracting. I pushed the door open, and light, clean and electric, spilled out onto the porch. Zoe stopped dead. She blinked, her pupils contracting. The air that flowed out of the house was cool. It smelled of nothing, no decay, no dust. Just clean air. I stepped inside and flicked a switch. The foyer brightened, revealing polished hardwood floors and white walls. A large, abstract painting hung on one wall. From the hallway, a young woman appeared. She was maybe 20, with large, nervous eyes. She wore a clean gray t-shirt and jeans. Her hair was tied back. This was Anna, my neighbor from 3B. When I found her, she'd been hiding in a pantry for 4 days, living off stale crackers. Liam, Anna said, her voice a little shaky. She saw Zoe behind me, saw the tactical gear and the bloodstains in the steel pipe. Her eyes widened and she took a half step back. It's fine, Anna, I said. She's with me. This is Zoe. Zoe didn't say hello. Her gaze swept the room, taking in every detail. The clean floors, the lack of dust, the electric lights. Her eyes found the corner of the living room, and for the first time, her professional mask cracked. She stared. A 7-foot-tall figure of baked brown clay stood perfectly still next to a bookshelf. It had no face, just a smooth, rounded head. Its fists were the size of small boulders. It was my golem, the one I'd traded 10 kilos of scrap iron for. It did not move, did not breathe. A statue, a silent guard. What? Zoe started, her voice a whisper. I walked past her into the kitchen. I opened the stainless steel refrigerator. The interior light came on, illuminating rows of food. Eggs, milk, vegetables, deli meat. A 6-pack of beer. And on the door, a dozen bottles of mineral water, beaded with condensation. I took one out. The bottle was cold, slick in my hand. I walked back to the foyer and held it out to her. You're dehydrated. She stared at the bottle. It was just a plastic bottle of water. I'd seen people kill for less. I had killed for less. She looked from the bottle to my face, then back to the bottle. Her training, her discipline, everything that had kept her alive for the last 8 days was at war with the simple, impossible reality of a cold drink. Slowly, her hand came up. The one not holding the pipe. Her fingers were trembling slightly as she took the bottle from me. The pipe fell from her other hand. It hit the hardwood floor with a loud clatter that made Anna jump. Zoe didn't even flinch. She twisted the cap. The crackle of the plastic seal was the loudest sound in the world. She lifted the bottle to her lips and drank. She didn't gulp. She drank slowly, deliberately, as if she was trying to memorize the sensation. The cold liquid going down her throat. The clean taste, free of grit or the metallic tang of purification tablets. When she lowered the bottle, her eyes were wet. The single tear that escaped traced a clean path through the grime on her cheek. The dam of her composure had been broken, not by terror or violence, but by a simple act of civility from a dead world. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, leaving a smear of dirt. I haven't, she stammered. I drank from a puddle yesterday. I know, I said. The shower is upstairs. Second door on the left. There's hot water. Towels are in the closet. Find some clothes that fit in the guest room. Leave yours in the hall. I'll dispose of them. My voice was flat, a series of instructions, but to her, it was absolution. She just nodded, her throat working. She looked down at the puddle water rag she was wearing, at the caked blood on her forearm where the dog had bitten her. The armor that had saved her life now felt like a cage of filth. She moved like an automaton, walking up the stairs, still clutching the water bottle. Anna looked from the stairs back to me, her expression a mix of fear and curiosity. Is she a soldier? A police officer? I corrected. She's strong. She'll be an asset. I picked up the steel pipe from the floor. I didn't need it anymore. We'll need to set some ground rules. Her job will be security. Yours remains logistics and health. My job is to provide the resources for you to do yours. Anna nodded, seemingly relieved to have a clear structure. I'll get the guest room ready. An hour later, Zoe came back downstairs. The transformation was startling. She had showered. Her dark hair was damp and fell around her shoulders. She wore a simple black sweatshirt and sweatpants that were a little big on her. The dirt and blood were gone. The exhaustion was still there, etched deep in her face, but the layer of desperate survival had been washed away. She looked human again. I was in the kitchen, making sandwiches. Thick slices of turkey, Swiss cheese, lettuce, on whole wheat bread. A feast. I had just finished when she walked in. She stopped in the doorway, her eyes on the food. Eat, I said, pushing a plate toward her across the granite countertop. She sat down and ate. She ate like she had drank the water. Slowly, methodically, savoring every bite. When she finished, she pushed the plate away and looked at me. The last of her suspicion was gone, replaced by a clear, unflinching assessment. No one lives like this, she said. It wasn't a question, not anymore. The power grid is down. The water is contaminated. That thing, the statue in the living room. The gun you used. She shook her head. You're not just a survivor. What are you? I'm a pragmatist, I said, leaning back against the counter. I saw this coming. I prepared. The specifics of how I prepared are my business. All you need to know is that here, you are safe. Here, you will not be hungry or thirsty. Here, the rules of the outside world do not apply. In exchange, I expect your absolute loyalty and the proficient execution of your skills. My skills, she repeated, a bitter edge to her voice. My skills got my team killed. Your team got themselves killed, I corrected her. One panicked and betrayed you. The others weren't prepared for the betrayal. You were. That's why you're here. You understand the new currency. It isn't bullets or food. It's reliability. She was silent for a long time. She looked at her own hands, clean for the first time in over a week. She thought about Henderson. She thought about the bunker they were supposed to reach, the one that was probably now a tomb. She thought about the taste of dirty water. What do you want me to do? She asked. Her voice was different. The cop was gone. This was someone else. For now, recover, I said. Then, you will take charge of this facility's security. You will train Anna in basic self-defense. You will maintain our weapons. You will be my right hand in all matters of combat and defense. You will be the shield. She stood up. She was a trained officer, a woman who understood chains of command. She came to a loose form of attention. I understand, sir. Don't call me, sir, I said. Call me Liam. I took another bottle of water from the fridge. This one was different. I'd added a single drop of a low-grade, spirit-cleansing liquid I'd traded a box of spark plugs for. It was meant to slightly improve the constitution of mortals in a cultivation world. Here, it might trigger something. An investment. Drink this too, I said, handing it to her. It'll help with recovery. She took it without question and drank it down. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her eyes widened. A slight tremor ran through her body. She put a hand on the counter to steady herself. What was that? She breathed. A jolt, a flicker of energy like a static shock to her entire nervous system. Hydration, I said. She didn't believe me. She looked down at her legs, then at the open space across the kitchen. Before I could say a word, she moved. It wasn't a run, it was a blur. She crossed the 20-foot distance to the other side of the room in less than a second, a whisper of displaced air. She stopped, her back to the wall, breathing heavily, a look of profound shock on her face. She looked at her body as if it were a foreign object. I'm fast, she said, her voice filled with awe and disbelief. I'm faster. Her latent ability awakened. Speed enhancement. A useful tool. Your body is just recovering properly, I said, offering no further explanation. Let her believe it was the food, the water, the safety. The less she knew about the true source, the more my own power seemed inherent, absolute. It was then that a new sound entered our sanctuary. It came from an old shortwave radio I had sitting on a shelf. I had been tinkering with it, powering it with a small solar cell. It was mostly static, but now, a voice cut through. Faint, looping. Survivors, to all survivors. This is the 103rd Armored Brigade of the U.S. Army. Established a secure perimeter at the old Fort Derrick military base. Repeat, Fort Derrick is secure. We have food, water, and medical aid. If you can hear this broadcast, make your way to all survivors. The voice repeated its message, a beacon of hope in a dead world. Zoe looked at the radio, then at me. Her expression was complex. Hope, caution, uncertainty. The old world was calling. I turned the radio off. The static died, and the secure silence of my house returned. They're gathering people, she said. I know, I said. And wherever people gather, they bring their weakness and their greed with them. Let them build their little fortress. I looked out the kitchen window into the gray, dead twilight. We'll build an empire. The first drop made no sound. It was a dark smear on the reinforced glass of the living room window, like a crushed insect. Then another, and another. A soft tap 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 began, a sound that should have been comforting. It was not. Inside, the air was 72 degrees. The low hum of the miniature fusion reactor in the basement was a constant, soothing presence. On the 60-inch screen, a Technicolor musical from the 1950s played out, men in suits dancing with women in bright dresses. A bowl of popcorn, hot and buttered, sat on the coffee table. Anna sat on the floor, cross-legged, her eyes fixed on the screen. She was tending to a small collection of pots under a grow lamp in the corner. In one, the first 2 leaves of a lettuce plant had unfurled. They were a vibrant, perfect green. She had been coaxing them to life for 3 days, her touch making them grow in a way that defied the dead world outside. She smiled at something on the screen, a genuine, untroubled smile. Zoe was on the couch, her posture relaxed but aware. She was field stripping a pistol on a mat, her movements economical and precise. Her new speed was a part of her now. She didn't lurch or jerk, she simply moved with an unnerving efficiency, her hands a blur of motion as she slid the components apart, wiped them with a clean cloth, and reassembled them. The click of the slide locking back into place was sharp and final. The tapping on the windows grew louder, faster. It was a drumming now. I looked at the glass. The drops were no longer clear. They were a greasy, greenish black, and where they struck the metal window frame, a faint wisp of smoke rose, almost invisible. I got up and walked to the wall-mounted panel that controlled the security cameras. My movement was silent. Zoe's head tracked me, her cleaning forgotten. Anna remained lost in her film. I switched the main screen from the movie to a 4-way split of the exterior cameras. The musical vanished. The screen now showed a world dissolving. Camera 1, the front gate. The heavy iron bars I'd reinforced with scrap metal were now streaked with black. Each drop of rain that hit them sizzled, eating away at the paint, then the metal itself. A fine, acrid vapor rose from the entire structure. The asphalt of the driveway bubbled. Camera 2, the street. A derelict sedan sat 50 yards down. As we watched, the rain intensified into a downpour. The sound was no longer a tap, but a roar, a constant hiss like a million frying pans. The car's roof began to pockmark, the metal groaning. The tires deflated with a series of soft pops, the rubber turning soft and gummy. What is that? Anna's voice was small. The movie was forgotten. The second stage, I said. My voice was level, a statement of fact. Weather. I pointed to a different monitor, a high-angle shot overlooking the back walls of the neighboring properties. Watch. A sound cut through the noise of the rain. It was a shriek, high-pitched and full of a pain that had no words. On the screen, a figure stumbled out of the back of a house 2 doors down. A man. His shelter must have failed. A cheap patio roof, maybe. He was clutching his face, his clothes smoking. He took 3 steps onto his ruined lawn before his legs buckled. He fell, his body hitting the sodden earth with a wet smack. The rain fell on him, and his screaming stopped. His body just steamed. Anna made a sound, a choked gasp, and covered her mouth with both hands. Zoe's face was stone. She had seen men die. But not like this, not erased by the sky. The rules have changed again, I said, turning away from the screen and looking at them. The light from the monitor cast flickering, gray shadows on their faces. The outside is no longer just dangerous. It is toxic. This is why we prepare. This is why we do not get complacent. Everything we have is inside these walls. I let the lesson sink in. The horror on the screen was the best teacher I could ask for. It was better than any command I could give. It forged loyalty through shared security. It made this house, this sanctuary, the only rational choice in a world gone mad. The radio on the shelf crackled. I'd powered it with one of my solar cells from a trade. A voice, strained and breaking up, cut through the static. Calling it death rain. Repeat, do not. I repeat, do not make contact with the precipitation. We are also confirming sightings of fast-moving hostiles. Code name, runners. They are not like the others. Do not engage. Lost contact with Outpost Gamma. The voice was swallowed by static. Zoe looked from the radio to me. Runners. Fast ones. It was bound to happen, I said. The virus mutates. Everything is evolving. I had already run into one 2 days ago on a quick supply run. It had been as fast as a dog. My laser pistol had turned its head into a cloud of overheated vapor. We need better defenses, Zoe stated. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a conclusion. I agree. I went to my room. In my dimensional storage, I had the payment and the reward. A mountain of useless things. Designer handbags, silk shirts, cashmere sweaters, old electronics. All looted from the nearby abandoned mall, all worthless here. I had traded them to a vain, low-level cultivator from a world where such fabrics were rare. In exchange, I received 2 items. A small, wooden box containing 12 miniature flags, each embroidered with a silver thread that seemed to absorb the light. This was a beginner's warning formation, and a single scroll of yellowed parchment, covered in geometric symbols drawn in what looked like ink mixed with blood. A minor barrier of force scroll, a one-use item from a Magic Academy apprentice. I brought them out. Zoe and Anna looked at the strange objects. New security system, I said. Zoe, with me. Anna, stay here. Lock the door behind us and do not open it until you hear my voice. Anna nodded, her eyes wide. Zoe just picked up a heavy crowbar. We suited up. The hazmat suits were another trade, an exchange for a case of 20-year-old scotch I'd found. They were military-grade, thick yellow rubber with sealed helmets. As the back door opened, the sound of the world hit us. A loud, wet hiss. The air smelled sharp, like bleach and burning wires. The rain was a physical force, hammering on my helmet. It wasn't water. It was thick, oily. I could see it eating away at the paint on the doorframe we had just exited. Zoe moved with a new grace, her steps sure on the slick, bubbling concrete of the patio. Where do they go? She yelled over the storm, her voice tinny through the suit's comms. I held up one of the small flags. Perimeter, 12 points, equidistant. We worked in silence, a well-oiled machine. I would pace out the distance, find the spot. Zoe would stand guard, her head on a constant swivel, the crowbar held ready. Then I'd kneel, pushing the small wooden stake of the flag into the soft, rain-soaked earth. The silver threads on the flag seemed to pulse with a faint light for a moment before going dim. One. Then another. We moved around the entire property, a slow, methodical dance in the middle of a chemical storm. The world outside our fence was screaming, but in our little bubble of work, there was only the hiss of the rain and the soft squelch of stakes entering the ground. The last flag went in near the front gate. As I pushed it into the mud, a flicker of energy, invisible to the eye, connected all 12 points. I felt it in my mind, a new sense. A map of my territory, now alive. I could feel the location of every flag, could sense the empty space between them. Any hostile intent crossing that line would now trigger an alarm in my head. Done, I said into the comms. The final task was the gate. The iron was weeping rust, groaning under the chemical assault. I took out the scroll. It felt warm to the touch, even through my gloves. I unrolled it and pressed it against the center of the gate. The symbols flared with a dull red light. The parchment dissolved, turning to ash, and the light flowed like water over the surface of the entire gate, sinking into the metal. A barely there shimmer hung in the air for a second, then vanished. I tapped the gate with the crowbar. Before, it would have rung with a hollow clang. Now, the thud was solid, dead, like hitting a mountain of solid rock. It's reinforced, Zoe said, her voice holding a note of wonder. Let's go inside, I said. Back inside, we stripped off the suits in the mudroom. The outer layer was pitted and scarred. 5 more minutes out there and it would have failed. We left them in a pile to be disposed of. The quiet of the house was a physical relief. Anna had the door open. She had made hot tea. We sat in the kitchen, sipping the warmth. The rain still raged outside, a monstrous, formless anger. But it couldn't touch us. For 3 days, the world drowned. From the cameras, we watched the neighborhood decompose. We saw things scuttling in the acidic twilight. Fast shadows that moved on 4 limbs, but were unmistakably once human. The runners. We saw a pack of them swarm a stranded truck, tearing the doors off with a strength that metal was not meant to withstand. Inside, our life continued. Anna's lettuce grew. She managed to sprout carrots. Zoe perfected her combat drills in the basement, a gray blur moving between targets. I spent my time on the system interface, bartering for the next stage of my plan. I traded a case of tarnished silverware for a packet of purifying water talismans. I traded a broken generator for a low-level earth golem core. On the 4th day, the rain stopped. A thick, foul-smelling fog replaced it. The world was scarred, pockmarked, and silent. Everything metal was a ruin of rust. Every puddle on the ground was a pool of diluted acid. The clean water in the city's pipes, already questionable, was now gone forever. The reservoirs would be poison. I stood at the window, looking at the devastation. Zoe came to stand beside me. They'll be desperate now, she said. The ones who survived. Water. They'll kill for a clean bottle of water. I know, I said. I pulled up a map on a tablet, tapping on a location a few miles away. The old Fort Derrick military base. The source of the broadcast. They have numbers. They have soldiers. But their wells will be contaminated. Their purification systems will fail. I looked at her. Her eyes were clear. She understood. We're not going to them for help, she stated. No, I said, my finger tracing a route to the base. We're going to them to make a deal. They think they're a fortress. They're about to become my first client. The fog was a shroud. It didn't roll in. It congealed out of the damp, scarred air, thick with the chemical bite of the rain's aftermath. Every metallic surface that wasn't sheltered was a weeping ruin of orange-brown rust. The puddles that cratered the buckled asphalt weren't water. They were traps, shallow pools of diluted poison that steamed faintly in the weak light. The world smelled of burnt wires and vinegar. I checked the seals on my boots. Zoe did the same, her movements economical. We stood in the mudroom, the inner door sealed behind us. The heavy, military-grade gear felt familiar now. Natural. You're sure about this? Anna's voice came through the comm unit in my helmet, a small, tinny sound. The radio said the bases are calling for people. Engineers. Doctors. We could just go there. They're calling for people because they're desperate, I said into my own mic. Desperation makes people stupid. And dangerous. We go to them when we hold all the cards. Not before. We need more stock. Stock. It sounded so sterile. It meant junk. Plastic sheeting, copper wire, old circuit boards, industrial chemicals. The things the world had thrown away were now my currency. The industrial park a mile away was a treasure trove. I knew it. I'd stored some of my own pre-collapse supplies in a unit there. I'll monitor the perimeter system, Anna said. Her voice had a note of resignation. Be safe. Lock the door, I said. A click sounded over the comms. We were on our own. I pushed the heavy back door open. The air hit me, a physical thing. I watched Zoe. She didn't hesitate. She moved out into the ruined world, her rifle held at a low ready, her head sweeping left, then right. Her speed wasn't just in her legs anymore, it was in her eyes, her reaction time. She processed the dead landscape faster than a normal person could. We moved single file, me in the lead. We kept off the street, sticking to the ruined backyards. The ground was soft, sucking at my boots with a wet noise. The only other sounds were our own breathing in our helmets and the drip 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 of corrosive residue falling from a gutter, eating a small hole in the dead lawn below. We saw our first one halfway there. It was crouched behind a rusted-out husk of a Prius. A runner, the new strain. It was all knotted sinew and raw, gray skin stretched tight over a frame that was no longer quite human. It was on all fours, its head twitching, sniffing the air. Behind it, shambling slowly out of the fog, came 3 of the old kind. Shufflers. The runner was the shepherd, the hunting dog for its dim-witted flock. I didn't raise my laser pistol. The energy signature was too bright, a beacon in the gloom. I drew my knife instead. It was a simple cob bar, its edge honed to a razor. I gave a single, sharp hand signal. You, left. Me, right. Zoe nodded inside her helmet. She vanished. Not literally, but her speed made it seem that way. She was a blur of gray against the gray fog, her combat boots making no sound on the soft earth. The runner's head snapped up. It had sensed something. Too late. Zoe's attack was a lesson in physics. She didn't go for the head. She came in low and fast from its blind spot. I saw the flash of her knife, once, twice. It wasn't a stab, it was a surgical slice. The runner's back legs buckled as its Achilles tendons were severed. It went down with a wet shriek, clawing at the mud, its primary weapon, its speed, gone. I was already moving. The 3 shufflers were still turning their heads dumbly toward the sound. I bypassed the thrashing runner. First shuffler. My knife went into the base of its skull. A solid, meaty crunch. I yanked it free. Second shuffler. It swung a clumsy arm at me. I ducked under it, my left hand grabbing the back of its rotten collar, my right hand driving the knife into its temple. The blade scraped against bone. I twisted. It dropped. Third one. It was facing me now, mouth open in a silent moan. I didn't slow down. A straight, hard thrust under its jaw, angling up. My arm went in almost to the elbow. I put my boot on its chest and kicked, freeing my blade. It took 4 seconds. Zoe put a single, precise stab into the back of the crippled runner's skull, silencing its pained hisses. She wiped her blade on its rags. We stood there for a moment, listening. Nothing. Just the dripping. We moved on. The industrial park was a ghost city of sheet metal and concrete. A high chain-link fence, now a net of rust, surrounded the complex. A section had been torn open. We slipped through. Inside, rows and rows of storage units and warehouses stood in the fog. Roll-up doors were scarred and dented. Some were torn wide open, their contents looted or ruined. I was heading for a specific warehouse in the back, a chemical supply depot. That's where the good stuff would be. As we got closer, I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A shout. Human. Followed by a metallic bang. I held up a fist. We stopped. I pointed to a stack of corroded steel drums. We got behind them, weapons ready. I moved to the edge and peered around. The scene was about 100 yards away. In the open space in front of warehouse C, a group of 5 people were backed up against the loading bay door. They were clean. Too clean. Their clothes were practical, cargo pants, sturdy jackets, but they were unstained, not like the filth-caked gear of most survivors. At their center was a woman. Even from this distance, she stood out. Tall, with her dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. She held no weapon, but her posture was rigid, unflinching. She was in control, even when she wasn't. That was Sloan. Protecting her were 4 men. They looked like professional bodyguards. 2 had pistols, which they weren't firing. Out of ammo, I thought. 1 had a tire iron. The one who seemed to be the leader, a broad-shouldered man with a crew cut, was shouting orders that were lost in the fog. This must be Rhodes. They were fending off a pack of zombies. 6 of them, and leading the charge were 2 runners. The bodyguards were clumsy. They were used to fighting people, not things that didn't feel pain. 1 swung his tire iron and connected with a runner's shoulder. The impact made a dull thud, but the creature barely flinched, just swiped with its claws, tearing long gashes in the man's arm. He screamed and stumbled back. The line was about to break. Zoe looked at me, her eyes questioning through her helmet's visor. I made a quick calculation. The people were irrelevant, but the warehouse behind them was my target. Those zombies were in my way, And if this Sloane was important enough to have 4 bodyguards in the apocalypse, she might have access to things. Information, resources. Saving her wasn't an act of charity. It was a potential investment. Clear the area, I said into the comm. Zoe gave a curt nod. She took the left flank. I took the right. We exploded from behind the drums. The guards saw us first. Their faces, already pale with fear, registered a new shock. 2 more figures emerging from the mist. Friend or foe? The zombies didn't have to wonder. Zoe was a nightmare of efficiency. She sprinted toward the fight, her form a low, gray line. The first runner turned to meet her. It was fast, but she was faster. She didn't meet it head-on. She slid, like a baseball player stealing a base, her knife held in a reverse grip. The blade opened the runner's thigh from hip to knee. It stumbled, its leg folding. As it fell, she was already up, spinning, her second knife burying itself in the creature's eye socket. I was on the other runner. It snarled and lunged. I didn't dodge. I had practiced with the hard Qigong. I met its charge, my shoulder lowered. The impact was jarring, like being hit by a small car, but I held my ground. My left hand shot out, grabbing its throat to hold it steady. Its claws raked my armored chest plate, screeching against the composite material. My right hand, holding the Ka-bar, came up in a short, brutal arc. Into the temple, hard. I felt the tip puncture the thin bone. The creature went limp. I shoved its body away. 4 shufflers left. The bodyguards stared, frozen. The man with the tire iron stood with his mouth open. Engage. I barked at Zoe over the comm. It was the only word we needed. It became a drill, a bloody, mechanical ballet. Zoe moved through them, a whirlwind of blades. Her targets were joints, knees, elbows, necks. She disabled, she crippled, she killed. No motion was wasted. I was the hammer. I moved from one target to the next, ignoring flailing limbs. My focus narrowed to a single point on each zombie's head. Stab, twist, pull, next. Stab, twist, pull, next. The air filled with the sounds of butchery. Wet impacts, the snap of bone, the tearing of flesh. And then, silence. A silence broken only by our own harsh breathing. All 6 were down. The entire engagement had lasted less than 20 seconds. I stood over the last one, my knife dripping a dark fluid onto the concrete. I let my eyes sweep over the scene. The bodyguards looked at us like we were the monsters. The man whose arm was gashed was cradling it, his face a mask of pain and shock. The woman, Sloane, was a different story. Her expression wasn't fear, it was assessment. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, flicked from me to Zoe, to our weapons, to the bodies on the ground. She was analyzing, calculating. This was a woman who was used to pricing assets. Right now, we were the most valuable asset she had ever seen. I didn't speak. I walked past them, my boots leaving clean prints in the grime, and inspected the roll-up door to warehouse C. It was locked. Good. Zoe came to my side. She didn't look at the survivors either. We were a self-contained unit. They were just part of the landscape. Finally, the spell of silence was broken. The lead bodyguard, Rhodes, seemed to recover himself. He straightened his jacket, trying to regain a shred of authority. He took a half-step forward, his face set in a hard scowl. "All right," he said, his voice trying for a commanding tone that didn't quite land. "You too. Thanks for the assist." He gestured with his empty pistol. "We'll take it from here. We need to secure this area for Ms. Sloane. Hand over your long-range weapon and your knives. In exchange, you can travel under our protection. We're on our way to a secure location." He looked from me to Zoe, expecting compliance. He saw a civilian who got lucky, a person to be managed and folded into his command structure. He was used to giving orders and having them obeyed. He thought he was re-establishing the old world's hierarchy. I slowly turned my head to look at him. I kept my helmet on. I let him see nothing but the dark, reflective visor. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him. Sloane saw it. A flicker of alarm crossed her face. She opened her mouth to speak, to stop him. But Rhodes was puffed up with bruised pride. He took another step. "Did you hear me?" I said. "Drop your..." I let a small sound escape my lips. It wasn't a word, it was a low chuckle, amplified and distorted by my helmet's speaker. A dead, electronic sound. Rhodes froze. For the first time, a sliver of real doubt entered his eyes. He had just watched us dismember 6 monsters in 20 seconds without breaking a sweat, and his first instinct was to try and disarm us. He just didn't know he was dead yet. He was just waiting for the paperwork to be filed. The sound of the distorted chuckle died in the air. It left a vacuum. I saw Rhodes's shoulders jerk, as if waking from a dream. The color drained from his face, leaving a pasty, grime-streaked mask. He understood. Not everything, but he understood he had made a mistake. I took a step. My boots scuffed on the concrete. The sound was loud in the cavernous space of the warehouse. Zoe moved to flank me, a silent gray shadow. We didn't need to communicate. We were two parts of the same machine. I said, Rhodes stammered, his bravado crumbling into dust. He tried to raise the empty pistol again, a hollow gesture. I didn't answer him with words. I focused. I let the pressure out. It wasn't a noise. It wasn't a light. It was a weight, a change in the very substance of the space between us. I watched the effect take hold on him. His breath hitched in his throat. A single bead of sweat broke free from his crew-cut hairline and traced a slow, clean path through the dirt on his temple. His knuckles, wrapped around the useless firearm, turned bone white. Then, his knees began to shake. A fine, uncontrollable tremor that threatened to spill him onto the filthy floor. His eyes darted around, looking for a source, for something to fight. There was nothing. There was only me. Sloane saw it, too. Her sharp eyes narrowed. She took a half-step back, her hand touching the arm of one of her other guards. A warning, or an anchor. She was analyzing this, trying to fit it into a box her old-world logic could comprehend. She was failing. I walked toward Rhodes. My pace was unhurried. Each footstep was a hammer blow against his collapsing certainty. I stopped directly in front of him. He was taller than me, broader. It didn't matter. He was looking at my helmet's dark visor, but he wasn't seeing a man. He was seeing the thing that had just torn 6 monsters apart and was now directing its attention to him. I raised my hand. He flinched. I didn't strike him. I rested my hand on his shoulder. It was a light touch. But through the training, through the hard qigong, my body had a density it never had before. Under my palm, his entire frame shuddered. He gasped, lurching back a step, saved from falling only by the wall of the loading bay behind him. I leaned in close, my helmet speaker inches from his ear. My voice was low, a flat, electronic whisper. In this world, the man with the bigger fist makes the rules. I paused, letting the words sink into his terrified mind. And you don't qualify. I pulled my hand back and turned away from him, a piece of trash to be discarded. The other bodyguards were statues, their faces a mixture of fear and confusion. The one with the gashed arm was moaning softly, the pain forgotten in the face of a new, less understandable threat. I ignored them all. I faced the woman, Sloane. Her posture was still rigid, but the unflinching confidence was gone. It was replaced by a keen, sharp-edged awareness. Calculation. She was no fool. She had just seen the entire power dynamic of her universe rewritten in 30 seconds. I pulled a plastic bottle of water from a pouch on my belt. It was clean, pristine, not a speck of grime on it. In this world, it was an ingot of gold. The sound of me twisting the cap off was a crack of thunder in the tense quiet. I saw the eyes of the man with the tire iron follow the motion. I saw him swallow, his throat working. He hadn't had clean water in days. His lips were cracked. One of the other guards, a younger man, licked his own lips unconsciously. They were dying of thirst. I raised the bottle to my lips, tilted my head back, and drank. The water was cold and pure. I drank half the bottle, a slow, deliberate act. I wasn't just quenching my thirst. I was demonstrating a fact. I have this. You do not. That is the only thing that matters now. I lowered the bottle and looked straight at Sloane. Her gaze was locked on me. Tell me, I said, my voice returning to its normal, amplified tone. What are you worth, that I should save you? The question hung in the air. It was a transaction, not a rescue. Rhodes, sagging against the wall, seemed to find a sliver of his old self. How dare, Ms. Sloane she's our hope for rebuilding. Quiet, Sloane said. Her voice was sharp, cutting him off mid-sentence. He flinched as if struck. Her eyes never left mine. The fear was gone, the calculation remained, but something new flickered within them. Recognition, an opportunity. She was not a damsel to be rescued. She was a CEO who had just spotted a hostile takeover she could profit from. The world had changed, and she was smart enough to change with it. One of her other guards, the young one, couldn't take the pressure. He started babbling. We just need to get to the military base at Fort Irwin. They're gathering people. But the roads, God, the things out there now. We saw rats the size of pigs in the sewers under Barstow. And the birds, they're not pigeons anymore. They're like gray pterodactyls. They hunt in packs. His words painted a picture of the escalating nightmare outside. A world where not only the dead, but the entire ecosystem was becoming a predator. It made the walls of this warehouse, this fortress I had just claimed, seem all the more valuable. Sloane took a decisive step forward, away from the protection of her broken guards. She straightened her back, meeting my gaze through the dark visor. She was rebranding herself for a new market. My name is Sloane. I was the CEO of the Taggart Corporation. I can manage logistics. I can create and execute long-term strategies. I can analyze intelligence, and I know how to organize and command people. She gestured to her two remaining effective guards, not Rhodes. They are loyal and follow orders. My security chief is wounded. We have no food and our water ran out 2 days ago. We have been drinking rainwater. It is making us sick. Save us, she stated, not pleaded. And I will dedicate all my skills and resources to serving you and your goals. As she spoke, I felt it again. A faint probe against the edge of my consciousness. It was weak, like a child's hand tapping on a thick steel door. Inquisitive, a clumsy attempt to soothe, to persuade. It was the source of the unnatural charisma she must have possessed in the old world. A low-level hypnotic suggestion, a fledgling power, raw, untrained, but there. An asset. I had come for chemical supplies. I might leave with something far more valuable. A strategic mind, the software needed to upgrade my survival shelter into a real stronghold. I gave a short nod. All right. A wave of relief washed over the faces of her men. The wounded one almost collapsed. Sloane's expression remained neutral, but I saw the tension in her shoulders release a fraction. But I don't carry dead weight, I continued, my voice flat. I turned my head slowly, letting my visor sweep over Rhodes, who was still propped up by the wall, his face a mask of humiliation and fury. I looked at the panicked young guard, and the man with the tire iron. And I have no use for men who mistake pride for strength. I took the cap and screwed it back onto the half-empty bottle of water. I tossed it to Sloane. She caught it with practiced ease. Her fingers tightened around it. Her most valuable possession. We leave in 5 minutes, I said, turning my back on them and walking deeper into the vast, dark warehouse. Zoe fell into step beside me. On the way back to base, you will all prove your worth. Anyone who can't keep up, or anyone who proves to be a liability. I didn't need to finish the sentence. The implication hung in the chemical-scented air, heavier than any physical threat. You will be left behind. The digital thermometer on the wall read 138 degrees Fahrenheit. That was the temperature outside, under the merciless white eye of the sun. The air beyond the reinforced glass shimmered, a visible distortion of heat rising from the cracked asphalt driveway. The world looked like it was melting. Inside, the thermostat was set to 72. A quiet hum from the vents was the only sound, the breath of the new god I had installed in the basement. I watched the world burn from the comfort of a leather armchair. We had made it back from the chemical warehouse a month ago. I had left Rhodes and his bluster behind. 2 of his men had tried to keep up. 1 hadn't. I didn't look back. The man who survived, a former Marine named Cutler, was now part of Zoe's security detail. He was quiet. He learned quickly. Sloane was everything she promised. The day after she arrived, the chaos of my stockpiled supplies began to vanish. Shelves were erected. Inventories were logged on a solar-powered tablet. Schedules were made. Rations, guard duty, maintenance. She didn't manage a base. She ran a nascent corporation. My corporation. Her shock at the sheer volume of my supplies, food, medicine, ammunition, was something I saw flicker in her eyes for a moment before being replaced by the cold light of calculation. She had chosen the right side. Her survival depended on it. Then the heat came. It followed the acid rains, a new phase in the world's death throes. The transition was swift. One day, corrosive water fell from a gray sky. The next, the clouds were gone, and the sun began to cook the earth. Water sources evaporated. The asphalt on the roads turned soft. Going outside during the day was suicide. The dead, and the things that were no longer just animals, learned this. They hunted at night, their hunger made more pointed by the thirst. The world was dying, we were not. I closed my eyes. The interface bloomed behind my eyelids, lines of blue text against a black field. It was not a vision. It was a tool, pragmatic. I scrolled past the low-tier listings. Hard Qi Gong, Level 1. Clay Golem, Basic. Water Purification Talismans. They were useful once. Now they were insufficient. Sloane's inventories were precise. We had 12 tons of scrap steel from the industrial warehouse. 3 tons of mixed polymers, PVC, polyethylene, shredded tires. A shipping container full of dead electronics I'd scavenged before the collapse. To this world, it was junk. To others, it was raw material. Industrial feedstock. My target was not a new weapon or a better fighting technique. It was something more fundamental. I was buying civilization back from the void. The trade was three-pronged. First, a junk heap of car batteries, copper wire, and fried circuit boards to a scavenger guild in a cyberpunk dystopia. In return, one Kageyama-class microfusion reactor, described as a stable, near-limitless power source for a small habitat. Second, 7 tons of steel plating and I-beams to a world of high magic, a realm rebuilding after a war with demons. In return, one aquatic reclamation matrix, a magical artifact capable of recycling any liquid, waste, contaminated water, blood, into a potable, mineral-rich state. Third, a container of mixed plastics and chemical precursors to a bioengineering collective in a distant star system. In return, a 500-kilogram crate of Terra Prime nutrient substrate. Enchanted soil, for all intents and purposes. The transactions completed, my dimensional space, the 500 cubic meter warehouse in my mind, groaned under the sudden influx of mass. I felt the weight of it, a pressure behind my sternum. I stood up. The others were in the common room. Sloane was at a table, her tablet glowing. Zoe was field stripping her rifle, the oiled parts laid out on a cloth with military precision. Anne, the girl from next door, was watching the outdoor cameras, her face pale. She was still terrified of the world, but she trusted me. That was enough. I'm going to the basement, I said. Anne, come with me. You'll be in charge of the new project. Her eyes widened, but she nodded and stood without question. Cutler, the silent ex-Marine, gave a curt nod from his post by the main door. He knew his job. The basement was concrete and cool. I manifested the items from my storage space. They appeared with a soft thud, displacing the air. The microfusion reactor was a dense, gray cube, the size of a washing machine, covered in ports and what looked like heat sinks. The aquatic reclamation matrix was a pulsing blue sphere held within a cage of coppery metal. The nutrient substrate was just a large, dark pile of what looked like rich soil. I didn't understand the science or the magic. I didn't need to. I had the instruction manuals, downloaded directly into my mind. I worked. Anne watched, her hands clasped together. I rerouted the villa's entire electrical system to the gray cube. I connected the main water lines and sewage pipes to the coppery sphere. The moment of truth. I flipped a switch on the reactor. The lights in the basement flickered. The hum of the emergency generator in the garage faltered and then died. For a second, there was only the sound of our breathing. Then, a new hum started. Deeper, steadier. The lights came back on, brighter than before. They would not go out again. I walked to the main breaker panel and flicked every single switch to on. Above us, I heard the powerful thrum of the central air conditioning unit kicking to life, a sound no one in this city had heard for months. Next, the water. I had Anne bring a bucket of the stagnant, brown sludge that had collected in a cistern outside from the last acid rain. It smelled foul. I poured it into the matrix's intake valve. The blue sphere pulsed brightly. A moment later, from a spigot on the other side, a stream of perfectly clear water flowed into a clean bucket. I picked up the bucket. The water was cool. I drank deeply. It tasted of nothing. It was pure. Anne gasped. It works, she whispered. I handed her the bucket. She drank, tears welling in her eyes. It was the first time she had drunk without fear since the world ended. We spent the next hour laying the nutrient substrate in a cleared-out section of the basement, under a bank of full-spectrum grow lights now powered by the reactor. I gave Anne the packets of heirloom seeds I'd stockpiled. Tomatoes, lettuce, cucumbers, peppers. This is your domain now, I told her. Her moat system ability, the one that made plants grow, would be amplified 100 times here. Feed us. She looked at the soil, at the lights, and at the seeds in her hands. She wasn't just a frightened survivor anymore. She was a provider. She had a purpose. It was a more powerful motivator than fear. Later that evening, the contrast became clear. The sun was setting, but the heat lingered, a physical weight on the world. I was in the command center, the former master bedroom, monitoring the perimeter cameras. On screen 3, which covered the street corner, I saw movement. A family, a man, a woman, a small child. They moved like ghosts, skeletons draped in rags. The man saw it first. A puddle near a blocked storm drain, a leftover from the old world, now a viscous, black trap. He fell to his knees beside it. He didn't hesitate. He plunged his hands in and brought the filth to his mouth. His wife did the same. They tried to give some to the child, but the child was already lying on the ground, not moving. I watched, my face reflected in the monitor. The man began to shudder a minute later. His back arched. A thin, dark fluid trickled from his mouth. He collapsed face first into the puddle he thought was salvation. The woman screamed, a silent shape on my screen. Then she, too, began to convulse. I switched the monitor. Screen 8, the inner courtyard. The floodlights, powered by the reactor, turned the green lawn into a slice of daytime. The sprinklers were on. The sound of them, a rhythmic ch-ch-ch, was the most luxurious sound in the world. Zoe was sitting in a lounge chair, a tall glass filled with ice and amber liquid in her hand. She was watching Cutler practice combat drills. I heard laughter from the kitchen. I turned. Anne was holding up the first tomato. It was small, barely ripe, but it was bright red and perfect. She was beaming. Sloane stood beside her, a rare, small smile on her face. She looked at the tomato, then at me as I entered the room. Her look wasn't just loyalty. It was reverence, the look one gives to something that defies all known laws of reality. We ate a salad that night. Fresh lettuce, crisp cucumbers, and the single, chopped tomato. The taste was explosive. Real food, clean food. In the background, the air conditioner hummed. The ice maker in the freezer dropped a new batch of cubes with a satisfying clatter. We were living in a fortress, a bubble of the old world sustained by the impossible. We had become a self-contained ecosystem. A heaven carved out of the middle of hell. Sloane finished her meal and brought her tablet over. Intel from the long-range scanners, she said, her voice all business again. Fort Irwin is in trouble. The military base. Their water purification systems are failing. They've instituted rationing, 2 ounces per person, per day. There have been riots. I nodded. It was expected. They were a larger, slower beast. They had rules, committees, bureaucracy. They were trying to save a world that was already a corpse. I was just saving myself and what was mine. That night, I stood on the balcony of the master bedroom. The air from the open door was cool and artificial. The air outside was a blast furnace, even in the dark. Below, the entire villa glowed, a beacon in the oppressive blackness of the dead city. For miles in every direction, there was nothing but darkness and decay. Here, there was light. There was water. There was life. I knew it was a risk. A beacon doesn't just offer hope. It also attracts attention. As if summoned by the thought, I saw it. On the ridge overlooking our valley, far in the distance. A flicker of light. A campfire. Then another, a little ways from the first. They weren't monsters. Monsters didn't need fire. They were people. They were out there in the heat and the dark, dying of thirst. And they had seen our lights. They had seen our island of paradise. I watched the distant fires, and I felt nothing. No pity, no fear, only a calm, cold certainty. They would come, and I would be ready. The steak knife slid through the ribeye with a whisper. On my plate, the meat was a perfect medium rare, its juices mingling with the melted garlic butter. Across the table, Zoe ate with the focused efficiency of a soldier, while Anne picked at a small piece, her attention more on the fresh salad beside it. The tomatoes and cucumbers from her basement garden were a triumph. Sloane ate slowly, deliberately, a wine glass of filtered water in her hand. The hum of the air conditioning was a constant, soothing presence against the memory of the furnace outside. The clink of cutlery on ceramic plates. The soft thud of the ice maker dropping another cube. These were the sounds of our new world. Another perimeter sweep at 2200? Zoe asked, not looking up from her plate. Her voice was flat, a statement more than a question. Yes, Sloane answered for me. I've flagged 2 sectors for drone overwatch. There's a new type of bioluminescent fungus appearing in the sewer lines on the east side. Low-level toxicity, but it's spreading fast. I saw Anne flinch at the word, fungus. She looked at the food on her plate, then at me. I gave a slight nod. Her food was safe. The fear subsided from her eyes, replaced by the now familiar look of trust. A soft, electronic chime cut through the room. Not an alarm, a notification. Sloane picked up her tablet from the table beside her. Her fingers swiped across the screen. Her brow furrowed. Motion at the front gate, she said. Multiple contacts. 13, to be exact. Human. They're not trying to be quiet. Zoe put her fork down. The sound was unnaturally loud. Her hand rested on the grip of the pistol holstered at her hip. Cutler, standing by the hallway leading to the front door, shifted his weight. His shotgun was held at a low ready. On screen, I said. Sloan tapped the tablet. The large monitor on the wall, which had been displaying a static image of a forest, flickered to life. It showed the view from the camera embedded in the main gate. The image was stark, rendered in the high-contrast black and white of the infrared lens. 13 figures stood just beyond the wrought iron bars. They were thin, skeletal, their clothes were rags hanging off bony frames. They looked like a gathering of ghosts under the indifferent stars. They were staring at the house, at the soft light spilling from our windows, at the faint shimmer of the heat rising from the ground around them, a halo that did not touch the manicured lawn inside our walls. One of them stepped forward, a young man, maybe my age. He wore glasses, one lens cracked. Even in the grainy image, his posture was different from the others. They slumped with exhaustion. He stood stiff, with an air of purpose. They haven't tried the gate, Zoe observed. Just standing there. They're making a statement, Sloan said, her voice cool. This isn't a raid, it's an appeal. I pushed my chair back and stood up. The meal was over. I wiped my mouth with a cloth napkin. Zoe looked at me. Want me to go out there? A few warning shots from the rifle will send them scattering. No, I said. Let them make their appeal. I walked to the command center, Sloan and Zoe following. I keyed the intercom connected to the speaker at the gate. You have 30 seconds, my voice boomed out into the night, metallic and disembodied. On the screen, the group flinched. The young man with the glasses, however, stepped closer to the gate, his hands empty. We don't want to fight, he shouted, his voice thin against the oppressive night. We saw your lights. We know you have power. You have water. He gestured to the green lawn, a dark patch of impossible life in a dead world. In this new world, we have to stick together. The strong, the fortunate, you have a responsibility to help the weak. It is your duty to share what you have. Everyone has a right to live. Zoe snorted, a sharp, disgusted sound. Right to live. I'll show him his right to live. Sloan simply stared at the screen, her expression unreadable but her eyes cold. It's an ideology, she murmured. More dangerous than a man with a gun. A man with a gun, you can shoot. A man with an ideology will convince your own people to shoot you for him. I watched the young man on the screen. His name didn't matter. His face didn't matter. He was a type, the kind of person who survived the first wave not through strength or cunning, but through the charity of others, and had come to see that charity as a debt owed to him by the world. I'm going out, I said. Jake, Zoe started, taking a step forward. Stay here, I commanded. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Cutler fell into step behind me as I walked to the front door. I took the pistol from him, checked the magazine, and tucked it into the back of my waistband. The hard qi gong I'd practiced circulated within me, a subtle warmth under the skin, a feeling of density. The moment I opened the heavy, reinforced door, the heat hit me like a physical blow. It was suffocating, a solid wall of air that smelled of baked asphalt and decay. The 72-degree air from the house swirled out and vanished instantly. I walked down the stone path, the grass cool and slightly damp under my boots. I stopped 10 feet from the gate. The iron bars separated two universes. Inside, life. Outside, death begging for entry. The 13 of them stared at me. Their eyes were wide in the gloom, reflecting the light from my house. They saw my clean clothes, my healthy frame, the way I stood without a tremor. The smell hit me next. Sweat, filth, sickness, and desperation. It was the smell of the world I had left behind. The young man with the glasses took another step, his hands gripping the bars. See, he said, a note of triumph in his voice. We can be reasonable. We are not monsters. We are just people, like you. Let us in. Share your supplies. We can help. We can work together. I looked at him. I let my eyes drift over the others. A woman clutching a child's hand. An old man leaning on a pipe. All of them watching me, their faces a mixture of hope and resentment. They didn't see a survivor. They saw a resource they were entitled to. I focused on the young man. I let a fraction of my will press down on him. It wasn't a physical force. It was a weight on the mind. A cold dread that starts in the pit of the stomach. I saw his knuckles whiten on the bars. A bead of sweat traced a line through the grime on his temple. His self-assured posture faltered. My resources, I said, my voice even and clear, are mine because I bled for them. Your right to live is yours to earn. Get lost before I change my mind. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the cicadas seemed to hold their breath. The group stared, stunned. The young man, Leo, let go of the bars as if they had suddenly become red hot. His face, a mask of disbelief, contorted into outrage. You can't, he sputtered, the weight on his mind making him stammer. That's inhuman. You're a monster, a hoarder, a cancer on the spirit of humanity. People are dying out here, and you're living in a palace. You have no right. His voice grew louder, shriller. He was shouting now, performing for his audience of waifs and strays, trying to reclaim his authority. You are the problem, the selfishness. You will be judged. History will judge you. I didn't answer. I just watched him. His words were meaningless noise. They were the whining of a child who had been told, no, for the first time. I turned my back on him, on all of them, and began walking back to the house. His shouts followed me, bouncing off the stone facade of the villa. They were curses and condemnations, the desperate cries of a man whose only weapon, moral posturing, had just been proven useless. I stepped back inside. The cool, clean air washed over me, rinsing away the stench of the outside. The heavy door clicked shut behind me, cutting off the final shriek from the man at the gate. Zoe had her rifle in hand, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. Give the word. I can have the gate electrified in 30 seconds. No, I said, handing the pistol back to Cutler. They're not a threat. They're just a lesson. I went back to the dining room. My steak was still on the plate, slightly cooler now, but no less appetizing. I sat down and picked up my knife and fork. Sloane was watching me, her head tilted. That was the correct strategic decision, she stated, as if closing a file. Allowing them in would have been a catastrophic failure. They would consume, not contribute. Their ideology of entitlement would have spread like a virus, poisoning morale and undermining the command structure. They are more dangerous than a horde of the dead. Anne was twisting her napkin in her lap. Her face was pale, but they looked so hungry. Everyone is hungry, Anne, I said, cutting another piece of steak. Hunger doesn't give you a right to another man's food. She looked down, nodding slowly. She did not understand the cruelty, but she understood my reasoning. Her loyalty was to this house, to us, not to the ghosts at the gate. Later, from the command center, I watched the monitors. The group lingered for another hour. Leo harangued them, pointed at the house, gesticulated wildly. But his fire was gone. My indifference had taken it from him. Eventually, they began to drift away, following him back into the sweltering darkness of the dead city. They vanished from the camera's view. Sloane stood beside me, watching the empty screen. They'll remember us. I know, I said. Let them. I thought of their ragged clothes and their leader's hollow words. Then I thought of our stockpile, the hum of the reactor, the cool water flowing from the taps, and Anne's small, miraculous garden growing in the basement. The contrast was everything. They won't survive long with him leading them, I said, more to myself than to her. Reality is a patient teacher. Sooner or later, it gives everyone a final exam. I switched the monitor back to the view of our courtyard. The sprinklers were off now. The lawn glistened under the floodlights. It was an island, my island, and I would let no one sink it. 3 days, 3 rotations of the sun searing the earth. Inside the walls, it was always 72 degrees. On the training patio, shaded by a retractable solar-paneled awning, the heat was a distant pressure. Zoe moved through a sequence of strikes I'd shown her. Her movements were sharp, economical, learned from years of police work. What I was teaching her was different. It wasn't about subduing a suspect. It was about rupturing organs. Her combat knife, a keepsake from her old life, cut the air with a clean shink. Again, I said. She reset, her breathing controlled. She was a quick study. The hard qigong I traded for was already making her stronger, more durable, but this was about weaponizing that new resilience. Anne was in the basement with her garden. The new grow lights, a trade for a bag of ball bearings with a scavenger crew from a subterranean Ark City, bathed her plants in a purple glow. She was expanding. More tomatoes, lettuce, a new section for medicinal herbs. Her world had shrunk to that humid, engineered sanctuary, and she was its gentle queen. Sloane was in the command center, as always. A drone feed on one screen showed a pack of standard husks shambling down a residential street 3 miles away. On another screen, data scrolled. Atmospheric pressure, spore counts, seismic activity. This morning, she'd reported a new development. They're calling them commanders on the encrypted channels, she had said, her tone level. Non-aggressive variants. They observe. They seem to direct the others with low-frequency vocalizations, setting up rudimentary ambushes near choke points. The world outside was learning, evolving. I felt the familiar chime in my mind, the notification from the system. A merchant from the 10,000 Swords sect was online. His request was simple. He wanted chocolate, dark, 70% cacao or higher. A delicacy for the cloistered cultivators. I had pallets of it. I opened the interface, a transparent blue screen only I could see. I selected 5 bars of high-end Swiss chocolate from my dimensional space. The listed value in his world was negligible. In mine, it was a forgotten luxury. Trade item: 5x high cacao dark chocolate bars. Offered item: 1x 1000-mile eye talisman. The description was simple: a low-grade Taoist charm. When activated with a drop of blood, it allowed the user's vision to project to any location they could visualize within a 5-mile radius for 10 minutes. A disposable, single-use spyglass. Useful for a man who preferred not to leave his fortress. I confirmed the trade. The chocolate vanished from my inventory. A small, yellow paper talisman with red ink markings appeared in its place. I tucked it into my pocket. A small investment. A flicker of curiosity, cold and academic, moved through me. Leo, the man with the cracked glasses and the loud, useless morality. I wondered what lesson reality had taught him in the last 72 hours. He and his flock had been heading east, towards the old industrial park. I could picture it, the rusted chain-link fences, the shattered windows of the warehouses. I walked to the balcony overlooking the dead, brown hills. I took out the paper talisman. I pricked my thumb with the point of Zoe's knife, which she paused to offer me without a word. A single drop of blood fell onto the red ink. It sizzled and vanished. The paper felt warm in my hand. I closed my eyes and pictured the industrial park. My vision shifted. It was not a physical movement. It was a wrenching of perspective. I was no longer on my balcony. I was hanging in the air, 1,000 feet above a sprawling complex of warehouses. The view was clear, sharp as high-definition video. The sun baked the corrugated steel roofs. I focused my will, and my viewpoint drifted down, through a hole in the roof of the largest building. Dust motes danced in the slanted beams of light. Below, I saw them. Leo's group. There were fewer now, maybe 9 or 10. They were huddled around a small fire, boiling water in a hubcap. Then I saw the source of their renewed hope. Leo was standing tall, his chest puffed out, addressing a new group of people. 5 of them, 3 men, 2 women. They looked beaten, starved. One of the men had his arm in a crude sling. Leo was gesturing, speaking with an animated passion. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the script. We are all human. We must help each other. We will share what little we have. I saw one of his followers, the woman who had clutched her child's hand at my gate, offer the newcomers a piece of dried meat. The newcomers took it with mumbled thanks and lowered eyes. I shifted my focus. I looked closer at the new arrivals. The man with the sling, his eyes weren't filled with gratitude. As he chewed the meat, he glanced at the other men in his group. It was a fleeting look, barely a flicker, but it was as clear as a shout. It was an inventory. It was an assessment. He was counting Leo's people. He was judging their strength, their weapons, a pipe, a sharpened piece of rebar, a single kitchen knife. His gaze lingered on the women in Leo's group. The leader of the newcomers, a tall man with a scar that cut through his eyebrow, nodded once. A signal. They had found their mark. Not saviors. Prey. The talisman's power was a strange sensation. A detachment. I was watching a television show. A nature documentary where the lamb invites the wolf into the pen. I watched for another minute as Leo's sermon on humanity continued. Then, I pulled my vision back. The world snapped back into focus. I was on my balcony. The air was hot. The talisman in my hand crumbled into ash. That evening, we ate pasta. Anne had made the sauce from her tomatoes. The flavor was bright, a sharp counterpoint to the preserved meats. As we ate, I turned on the observation monitor in the dining room, tuning the drone's thermal camera to the industrial park. I was curious to see the final exam. The drone's view was a silent film in shades of orange, white, and black. The fire was a bright white blossom in the center of the warehouse. The human shapes around it were pale orange. Leo was still talking. The attack came with no warning. The tall man with the scar stood up, as if to stretch. In one smooth motion, he swung a length of heavy chain he had concealed under his jacket. The chain wrapped around the neck of one of Leo's men sitting by the fire. The man made a choking sound, his hands flying to his throat. The scar-faced man yanked back. There was a crack that I could imagine, even if I couldn't hear it. The orange figure went limp. It was a signal. The man with the sling, his arm suddenly fine, pulled a tire iron from his pants and brought it down on the head of the man next to him. The thermal signature of the head flared white-hot for a second, then dimmed. The other newcomers moved with practiced, vicious speed. It wasn't a fight, it was a slaughter. A shiv made of sharpened plastic went into someone's back. A woman was grabbed by her hair and thrown to the concrete floor. Leo stood frozen for a full second. His face, even as a thermal blur, was a mask of confusion. His ideology was a shield made of smoke, and a pipe wrench was coming right through it. He turned to run. The third man from the new group lunged, tackling him to the ground. I watched, my fork halfway to my mouth. Anne gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Jake, watch," I said. My voice was calm. Zoe didn't flinch. She just watched the screen, her jaw tight. Sloane looked from the monitor to me, then back again, her face a cool mask of analysis. This was data, a case study in cause and effect. On the screen, Leo was on his back. The man on top of him raised a rock. He brought it down once. Twice. A third time. The orange shape of Leo's head lost its integrity. The show was over. The bandits were efficient. They rounded up the survivors. 3 women from Leo's group. They gathered the meager supplies. The hubcap of boiled water. The last few scraps of food. The kitchen knife. Within 5 minutes, they were dragging their new acquisitions out of the warehouse, leaving the bodies behind for the husks. But they had missed too. In the initial chaos, 2 figures had scrambled away into the deep shadows at the edge of the warehouse. The drone's thermal camera barely picked them up, 2 cooler shapes pressing themselves into a recess in the wall. It was the woman who had first offered the meat, and a thin, jumpy-looking young man. They waited, motionless, for what must have felt like an eternity. When the bandits were gone, they fled. They ran out of the warehouse and into the night, stumbling, falling, looking back over their shoulders. They were running in our direction. They saw where the lambs were slaughtered, Sloane murmured. Now they're running back to the only other shepherd they know. They arrived just after dawn. I watched them on the gate camera. They didn't stand and shout. They fell to their knees on the scorched asphalt outside the bars. Their faces were smeared with dirt and tears. The confidence, the entitlement, the judgment, it was all gone. Burned out of them. I walked out to the gate, the morning heat already thick. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, letting them sob. The smell of their fear was different from last time. It wasn't mixed with resentment. It was pure. Finally, the woman looked up. "Please," she whispered. They, everyone. "It's all our fault. We were stupid. Please. I don't trade in charity," I said, my voice cutting through her crying. "I trade in value. What can you do?" The young man shook his head, still lost in shock. But the woman, her eyes wide, seemed to grasp a lifeline. Before, I was a mechanic. I worked at a garage. Engines. Generators. I can fix things. I can. I looked at her hands. They were calloused. Greased was worked deep into the lines of her skin. She wasn't lying. I turned to the young man. "And you?" He flinched. Nothing. I was a student. I don't know anything." He started to cry again. But the woman grabbed his arm. "He's a hard worker. He listens. He is honest. He never lied. He just followed." I considered them for a moment. A mechanic was a tangible asset. An honest, obedient worker was a low-risk resource. The others had died for their beliefs. These 2 had survived because they were capable of shedding those beliefs in the face of facts. They had learned their lesson. "Sloane," I said into my comms. "Open the gate. We have 2 new arrivals. Assign them to quarantine quarters C. The woman reports to engineering after she's cleaned up. The man gets assigned to manual labor detail under Zoe's supervision." The heavy gate slid open with a hydraulic hiss. The woman scrambled through, pulling the dazed young man with her. She didn't look at me, just at the green grass and the clean stone of the house, as if she'd just entered heaven. I turned to walk back to the house when Sloane's voice came over the comms again, stripped of any inflection. "Jake, you need to hear this." I walked into the command center. She had a radio transmission playing over the main speakers. It was a military broadcast, the signal frayed with static. Repeating this message on all emergency frequencies. Unconfirmed sightings of a major horde. Migration pattern is southbound. Initial estimates are in the tens of thousands, possibly more. All fortified survivor enclaves in the quadrant are advised to consolidate forces. This is not a drill. The ironclad convoy from Fort Benning is mobilizing, but we cannot reach everyone. I repeat, a horde of unprecedented size is moving towards this sector. Consolidate or be overrun. The message looped. Tens of thousands. The scale was different now. The threats were no longer small-time bandits or deluded idealists. I looked at the map on Sloane's screen, a red arrow indicating the horde's projected path. It was heading straight for us. Straight for the city. My island, my fortress, was directly in the path of a hurricane made of teeth and claws. I could no longer just watch the show from a distance. The show was coming to my front door. A gray film coated the sky, a permanent cataract smudging out the sun. It had been like this for weeks, ever since the summer's punishing heat had broken. The world had settled into a kind of lukewarm morgue. From the command center, I watched the two new ones work. The screens showed everything. Maya, the mechanic, had her hands deep inside the guts of a backup generator. Her movements were sure. She didn't waste motion. Grease was a second skin on her hands, but the tools moved like a surgeon's instruments. She was an asset. Finn, the student, was hauling bags of soil for Anne's expanded grow-op in the basement. He was clumsy, but he didn't stop. He didn't complain. He just worked until Zoe told him to rest. They ate what they were given. They slept where they were told. The lesson I taught them had been administered by a man with a rock, and it had stuck. They didn't make eye contact with me unless I spoke first. They were ghosts haunting the edges of my fortress, useful, and nothing more. Sloane sat at her console, her focus on a different screen. A topographical map of the region. A pulsing red arrow, marked Horde, inched its way south. 57,000, she said, without turning around. Her voice was flat, a simple statement of fact. That's the military's latest satellite count. They're moving at an average of 2 miles per hour. Uniform speed. They don't stop. They don't scatter. The commanders, the new variants were hurting them. Turning a mindless disaster into a directed weapon. The map showed their projected path. A thick red line of probability. It ran over the abandoned downtown district, through the suburbs, and directly over my front lawn. It also ran directly over the military's Sector 7 command at the old airbase. We were both on the menu. I had been spending my trade points. The system was a well I could draw from, and the coming tide required a bigger bucket. I sold off a truckload of scrap steel, rebar, I-beams, the remains of a collapsed warehouse I'd found on a drone scout, to a forge master in a dwarven kingdom. In return, I received the schematics and core components for 4 automated sentry turrets. Not gunpowder weapons, laser cannons. I sold a crate of pre-war antibiotics to a Plague World medic for an upgrade package for my primary golem. I said nothing to the others about the new defenses. There was no need. Their faith was not in the walls or the guns. It was in me. The sound came first, a low, heavy rumble that vibrated through the concrete floors. It wasn't the shambling groan of the dead. It was the sound of engines. Plural, heavy. We have company, Zoe's voice crackled over the comms. 3 vehicles approaching from the east. Military. I looked at the monitor displaying the long, straight road leading to the compound. A dust cloud heralded their arrival. An MATV, a sand-colored beast of a vehicle, led the procession. Behind it were 2 canvas-topped cargo trucks. They stopped 100 yards from my gate. Men spilled out. They wore faded fatigues and carried standard M4 rifles. They moved with a discipline that had long since vanished from the world. They formed a perimeter. An officer stepped out of the M-ATV's passenger side. He was young, his uniform too clean, his jaw set in a mask of unearned authority. He held a loudspeaker. "Attention, occupants of this compound," the voice boomed, metallic and distorted. "This is a formal communication from the Sector 7 Command of the United States Armed Forces." Sloane swiveled in her chair to look at me. Her expression was one of mild curiosity, like a scientist observing a new kind of bacteria. The officer, a lieutenant by his rank, continued. "In light of the approaching existential threat, and by the authority granted under the National Emergency Powers Act, all civilian settlements and assets are hereby requisitioned for the collective defense effort. Your resources, your facility, and any able-bodied personnel are now under the jurisdiction of Sector 7 Command. Open your gate and prepare for integration. Non-compliance will be met with force. You have 5 minutes. He lowered the loudspeaker. The soldiers fanned out, taking aim at my walls. They were not here to talk. They were here to take. He was a message, a declaration that their world, the one with flags and orders and chains of command, still mattered. That my world, the one I had built, was merely a footnote to be absorbed. I stood there for a moment, watching his silhouette on the screen. He was posturing, a rooster puffing out its chest. Sloan, I said into my comm, my voice quiet. Showtime. She typed a short sequence of commands. A low grinding sound echoed from the main house, a noise of stone and steel moving in ways they were not designed to. High on the facade, 4 sections of the reinforced concrete wall slid back into hidden recesses. From the dark openings, 4 cannons emerged. They were not from this world. Gleaming, black, and seamless, their design was brutally efficient. There were no ammo feeds, no shell casings. Just a complex focusing lens at the muzzle of each barrel. They swiveled on silent hydraulic arms, locking onto the military vehicles below. The targeting was instantaneous. A low hum started to build, a sound that made the fillings in your teeth ache. A faint blue light began to coalesce inside the 4 muzzles. The air around the house felt charged, heavy. Then, from the side of the house, my golem stepped into view. It was no longer just a clay man for heavy lifting. It was a walking weapons platform. Bolted to its broad shoulders were 2 M2 Browning .50 caliber machine guns, their ammo belts feeding from armored boxes on its back. Its clay hands were reinforced with steel plating. It stood 10 feet tall, impassive, its featureless head aimed at the soldiers. It didn't make a sound. On the monitor, I watched the lieutenant. His posture changed. The rooster's confidence collapsed. He took a single, involuntary step back. His mouth was open. The rifle in the hands of the soldier next to him suddenly looked like a child's toy. The loudspeaker fell from his hand, hitting the asphalt with a plastic clatter. He fumbled for the radio on his shoulder strap, his hands shaking. I watched his lips move on the high-resolution camera. I couldn't hear his words, but I could read the panic in his eyes. The easy part of his day was over. He was no longer the one holding all the cards. He was a man pointing a handgun at a nuclear submarine. The soldiers looked from my walls to their lieutenant and back again. Their discipline was cracking. I saw one of them lower his rifle a few inches. Fear was a more powerful commander than any officer. Sloan leaned back in her chair. I believe the terms of engagement have been revised, she murmured. On the comm system, I could hear Zoe's team confirming they were in position along the wall, their expressions invisible but their readiness a palpable certainty. The lieutenant was now shouting into his radio. His face was pale, his clean uniform starting to show a dark patch of sweat at the collar. He gestured wildly at my house, at the cannons, at the golem. He was trying to describe the impossible. Silence stretched. The blue glow in the cannon muzzles held steady, a promise of silent, instantaneous violence. The golem stood like a statue from a dead war god's temple. My gate remained closed. My answer had been given without a single word. After a full minute that felt like an hour, the radio on Sloan's primary console crackled to life. It was a different channel, a direct patch from the officer's radio. The voice that spoke was not the lieutenant's. It was older, deeper, and stripped of all arrogance. It was the voice of a man who had seen enough to know when he was outmatched. "This is Colonel Maddox, commanding officer of Sector 7, the voice said, the transmission sharp and clear. I am speaking to whoever is in charge of that facility. Lieutenant Pierce has failed to establish a productive dialogue. I would like to talk to you directly. We have a mutual interest that is currently crawling towards us at 2 miles per hour. I picked up the headset from the console. I looked at the screen, at the small figures of the soldiers down below, now dwarfed by the shadow of my defenses. The negotiation had begun, not as a master to a subordinate, but as one king to another. The hiss of the open channel filled the room. It was a thin, constant sound, the breath of a dead world. On the screen, Lieutenant Pierce stood frozen by his vehicle, a statue of crumbling authority. The blue glow from my cannons painted the side of his face. Colonel Maddox's voice came back, stripped of the younger man's bluster. It was worn, like leather rubbed smooth by years of use. I am speaking to whoever is in charge of that facility. Lieutenant Pierce has failed to establish a productive dialogue. I would like to talk to you directly. We have a mutual interest that is currently crawling towards us at 2 miles per hour. I slid the headset over my ears. The foam pads were cool against my skin. My eyes stayed on the monitor. On Pierce. On his men, whose rifles were now pointed at the ground. Their discipline was a frayed rope, about to snap. Fear was a better officer than any man with bars on his collar. "You're talking to him," I said. My voice was low. I didn't need to raise it. A pause. The hiss of static. "I am Colonel Maddox, Sector 7 Command." "You have a name?" "I have a fortress," I replied. "You have a problem." "Those are the only two names that matter right now." Another pause, this one longer. I could hear a faint exhale over the comm. "I see. You have formidable defenses. I'll concede the point, but a fortress is useless if it's overrun. That horde is not a random mob. We're tracking new things in it. Things our standard equipment can't handle. We need to consolidate our strength. For the greater good." The words slid off me. Greater good. The final, desperate prayer of men who have nothing left to offer. I leaned forward. "Your man, Pierce. Send him to my gate. Alone. Unarmed. He'll have 5 minutes to get from his truck to my door. You'll see him the whole way. He's my guest. Then you and I will have a clearer picture of what the greater good looks like." "What are you?" 5 minutes, I said, and cut the signal to his headset. I left the main channel open so he could hear everything. I keyed the comm for the gate. "Zoe, one guest coming. Make him feel welcome." On the screen, I watched Pierce receive his new orders through his radio. He looked from his truck to my gate, 100 yards of broken asphalt. His face was pale, the walk of shame. I toggled a switch. The main gate, a 10-ton slab of steel and concrete, groaned upwards with the sound of grinding stone, revealing a dark tunnel leading into the compound. Pierce started walking. His steps were stiff. Each one was a choice. His men watched him go. Their world, the one with flags and orders, was shrinking with every step he took. He reached the entrance. The gates slid shut behind him, the boom echoing in the sudden enclosure. Zoe was there to meet him. She didn't have her rifle. She didn't need it. She was flanked by 2 golems. Not the weaponized brute outside, but smaller, worker models. 6 feet tall, made of polished obsidian. They were a recent trade with a necromancer who had a fetish for pre-war comic books. Their heads swiveled, red light from their single eye slits tracking Pierce's every twitch. He flinched, his hand instinctively going for a pistol that wasn't there. His radio crackled on his shoulder. It was still patched through to my command center. "Status, Lieutenant?" Maddox's voice. Tense. Pierce cleared his throat. It came out as a wet cough. "I'm inside, sir." "Secure." "Good." My voice came through his radio, making him jump. "Follow the woman, and watch your step." I met them in the main atrium. The lieutenant's eyes couldn't process it all. The floor was polished marble. The air was cool and clean, smelling faintly of ozone from the scrubbers. Soft white light came from fixtures in the high ceiling. It didn't look like a bunker. It looked like a corporate headquarters. Pierce's gaze was locked on the far wall. It was a sheet of glass, 2 stories high. Behind it was a garden. Not a few pots of scraggly vegetables. A greenhouse. Green, vibrant, and alive. Rows of lettuce, red tomatoes hanging heavy on the vine, corn stalks reaching for the grow lights. A fine mist sprayed from overhead nozzles. The sight was an obscenity in this gray, dying world. "Water," he whispered. His voice was raw. It was the sound of a man in the desert seeing a mirage. "My God?" His radio crackled again. "What is it, Pierce? What do you see?" He couldn't answer. He just stared. I walked past him and keyed the door to the next section. "This way." The door hissed open. Cold air rolled out, raising goosebumps on my arms. We were in a storeroom. But it wasn't a room, it was a warehouse. Pallets stacked 20 feet high. Sacks of rice, flour, and beans. Crates of canned meat, fruit, vegetables. On one side, a row of industrial glass door freezers hummed, their interiors packed with vacuum-sealed sides of beef and pork. Pierce made a noise in the back of his throat. A choked sound. He took a stumbling step forward, his hand outstretched towards a crate of canned peaches like he wanted to confirm it was real. "Report, Lieutenant." Maddox's voice was sharp now, demanding. "Sir, food," Pierce croaked. "Enough to feed an army. For years." Silence on the comm, not even static. I led him onward, past the water purification plant, where a network of glass pipes and humming silver cylinders turned murky liquid into crystal clear water, bottling it automatically. I saw him staring at the thousands of sealed bottles stacked on shelves, his throat working. I didn't say a word. The final stop was the armory. It was also the barracks for my core team. Anne was there, wiping down a workbench. Sloan sat at a terminal, monitoring external feeds. Zoe had already returned, standing by a weapons rack. They were all in uniform. Not fatigues. A skin-tight, black nanofiber suit. Thin blue lines of light pulsed along the seams. It was a low-grade energy armor from a sci-fi world, good for stopping small arms fire and shrapnel. Lightweight, flexible, in their hands and on the racks were the weapons. Not M4s, laser rifles, sleek, matte black constructions with complex optics instead of iron sights. Pierce stopped dead. His military training fought with the raw shock on his face. He looked at the women. Then at their gear. He looked at Anne, who gave him a small, shy smile before turning back to her work. He looked at Sloan, who didn't even grant him a glance. He looked at Zoe, whose eyes were cold and hard. These weren't refugees I was protecting. They were soldiers. My soldiers. I let the scene sink in. I let him absorb the cool air, the clean light, the impossible abundance, the superior technology. I let Maddox listen to the silence over the radio. Then I spoke, my voice calm and even, knowing the colonel heard every word. Colonel Maddox, you spoke of the greater good. I nodded towards the greenhouse. My people eat fresh vegetables every day. They drink purified water. They sleep in warm beds. I gestured to the armory. They are protected by technology your engineers couldn't even dream of. I looked directly at Pierce, but I was speaking to the man on the radio. The greater good, Colonel, is an idea you sell to starving men to convince them to die for you. My people are not starving. And they are not dying for anyone's ideas but mine. I took a step closer to the trembling lieutenant. You wanted to requisition my assets. You wanted to absorb my personnel. So tell me, what, exactly, do you have to offer me? My voice dropped lower. Food? Water? Weapons? Each question landed like a physical blow. The silence over the comm was no longer just a lack of sound. It was heavy. It was the sound of a man's entire worldview being shattered. Sloan finally turned in her chair. Jack, she said, her tone level. New drone feed. You should see this. She tapped a key. A large screen on the wall flickered to life. It showed a grainy, zoomed-in view of the approaching horde. It was a river of shambling bodies. But in the middle of it, something else moved. It was huge, at least 12 feet tall. A grotesque fusion of bodies, a walking tumor of limbs and torsos. A mouth full of broken bones gnashed in the center of its chest. It swatted a car aside like a toy, the metal shrieking as it crumpled. We've picked up 3 of those so far, Sloan said. The boys at Sector 7 are calling them behemoths. A .50 calories round just makes them angry. Pierce stared at the screen, his face the color of ash. All the blood had drained from it. The food, the water, the tech, that was one kind of shock. This was another. This was the shape of his own death. The radio crackled. A long, drawn-out sigh. The sound of utter defeat. Get my lieutenant out of there, Maddox said. His voice was different. The steel was gone. The authority had evaporated. It was the voice of a man on the verge of begging. I nodded to Zoe. She nudged Pierce towards the exit. He moved like a sleepwalker. As he was being escorted out, Maddox's voice came again, hurried, desperate. Wait, don't cut the channel. A pause. Let's talk. A trade. Not a requisition. A trade. You have things we need. Desperately. We have manpower. We have intelligence on the Horde's movements. We can give you anything you want. Just name your price. I looked at the screen showing the behemoth. Then at the monitor showing Maddox's men standing around their useless trucks. The negotiation was over. The tribute was about to begin. The radio was an open wound. It bled static and the sound of a man's breathing. A man who had just surrendered his world. I watched the monitor. The image of the behemoth, the one Sloan's drone had captured, remained frozen on the main screen. A monument to his failure. A reminder of my leverage. Maya stood behind my chair. I could feel her presence, a warmth at my back. She didn't speak. She knew this was my moment. The silence in the command room was heavy, broken only by the low hum of the servers and the air scrubbers. It was the sound of a functioning world, a sound Colonel Maddox had probably forgotten. His voice came again over the open channel to Pierce's radio. It was strained, thinner. Let's talk. A trade. I leaned forward, my fingers resting on the console. My thumb hovered over the transmit button. I let him wait. Let the image of the flesh abomination burn into his mind. Let the sound of our clean, steady power hum in his ear. I was selling him a rescue, and the price had to be paid in hope before it was paid in steel. I am listening, Colonel, I said. My voice was level. I wasn't a general. I wasn't a politician. I was a merchant, and my store had the only goods that mattered. Food, he said, the word rushing out. We need food, and water. My men, their morale is breaking. We can't fight that thing out there if the men are fighting each other for a can of beans. I need enough to stabilize the base. For a week, at least. And in a week? I asked. You'll call me again? A pause. I heard a muffled curse on his end. No. This horde, intelligence suggests it's the main swarm. If we can break it here, we might buy months. Maybe a year. We have weapons. Heavy weapons. Mortars. A few javelins. We have armored vehicles, fuel. And we have the one thing you don't. Information. Our satellites are still partially functional. We have a network. We know where the hordes are moving. We know where other survivor enclaves are. We know where the dead zones are. He was laying his cards on the table. They were good cards. In the old world, they would have been a royal flush. But his chips were gone. I looked at Maya. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She understood the value. It was more than just guns. It was vision. Seeing the board. Your offer is insufficient, I said into the microphone. Another pause. Longer this time. I heard paper rustling. What do you want? Name it. This was it. The moment of transaction. The point where my old life, the one spent stacking cans in a basement while people laughed, officially died. And a new one was born. This is not a negotiation, Colonel, I said, my voice dropping. This is my list of terms. You will listen. You will not interrupt. And then you will agree. I let that hang in the air. I saw Zoe, standing by the armory door, cross her arms. A faint smile touched her lips. She understood power. First, I began, the supplies. I will give you food and water for 1,000 men for 1 month. Sealed, packaged, and purified. It will be delivered to your gate within the hour. In return, I want your heavy weapons. All of them. I'm sending you a list. It will include every mortar, every round, every anti-tank missile, every belt-fed machine gun, and every grenade in your inventory. I could hear a sharp intake of breath over the radio. It was a sound of violation. I was stripping him bare. Second, I continued, ignoring it. The vehicles. I want 6 of your MRAPs. The ones with the .50 cals. And 2 fuel tankers. Full. That would leave us with almost no mobile armor, he started, his voice a protest. You were speaking, Colonel? I cut him off. Cold. Sharp. The silence that followed was my answer. Third, the information. This was the real prize. I want full, real-time, uncensored access to your entire intelligence network. The satellite feeds, the drone footage, your radio intercepts. Everything. I also want a complete data dump of all pre-collapse military and government infrastructure maps for this state. I want the location of every bunker, every depot, every research facility, every strategic asset you have on file. That's classified at the highest. The government that wrote those classifications is dust, Colonel. Its offices are tombs. Its secrets now belong to those who can use them. I can use them. I leaned back in my chair. And finally, item 4. From this moment on, my facility, my people, and this territory are a sovereign entity. We are not a splinter group to be absorbed. We are not refugees to be managed. We are an independent power. You will treat us as allies. Equal allies. Your men will not approach my walls without permission. You will share all intelligence on new threats as you get it. In return, we will consider future trades. The room was still. Anne, who had been quietly cleaning a workbench, had stopped. She was staring at me, her eyes wide. This was beyond her imagining. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were ruling. The radio was silent for a full 30 seconds. It was a lifetime. I could picture him, in a cramped, poorly lit command tent, surrounded by officers with hollow eyes. The smell of fear and sweat in the air. Him, looking at his map, seeing the red icons of the approaching horde, and then looking at the meager supplies they had left. He had no choice. I had designed it that way. You're a pirate, he finally whispered. I'm a realist, I replied. Do we have an agreement, Colonel Maddox? A long sigh came through the speaker. The sound of a spine breaking. Send the list. Maya was already moving. Her fingers flew across a tablet. She had anticipated this, planned for it. The inventory list I'd dreamed of, quantified down to the last bullet, was transmitted. A moment later, a new window opened on my main screen. A data transfer protocol. The information began to flow. A river of raw text, satellite images, and encrypted files scrolling down a secondary monitor. It was beautiful. It was the nervous system of an empire, and I had just ripped it out and grafted it onto my own. Zoe let out a low whistle. 6 MRAPs. Sheesh, Jack. Christmas came early. She grinned, her eyes already alight with the possibilities. New patrols, new expeditions, new ways to kill. It's not Christmas, Maya said, her voice steady as she monitored the data stream. It's a hostile takeover, conducted with food instead of stock options. She glanced at me, a deep respect in her eyes that was more potent than any physical affection. She was a CEO who had found a new, more ruthless chairman of the board. While the military's secrets poured into my servers, a particular file flagged by Maya caught my eye. It was a field report from a different sector, hundreds of miles to the east. The title was Anomalous Energetic and Social Phenomena, Sector 11. I opened it. The report was disjointed, pieced together from panicked radio calls. It spoke of a group that had taken over a nuclear power plant. They called themselves God's Wrath. Their leader, a man no one had a picture of, claimed the virus wasn't a plague, but a purification. That only those who awakened new abilities, the gifted, were the next stage of human evolution. They were actively recruiting other, gifted, individuals, and executing normals, who refused to bow to them. They were a cult, but a cult with a power plant and a burgeoning army of superhumans. A problem for another day. But a problem noted. The exchange is complete, Maya announced, closing the file transfer window. All data has been downloaded and is being indexed by our system. Good, I said. Anne, prepare the first shipment. Use the worker golems. Palletize everything. I want it at their front door in 45 minutes. Anne's face lit up. She nodded eagerly, a sense of purpose shining in her. Yes, Jack. Right away. She hurried out toward the vast storeroom, her steps light. She wasn't just a scared medical student anymore. She was the quartermaster of an army. The deal was done. The immediate pressure was off. But this was only the beginning. I stood up and walked to the large monitor now displaying the new maps. The state was a patchwork of red zones, green zones, and vast areas of gray unknowns. But now, overlaid on the map, were dozens of new icons. Fuel depots, hidden armories, communications relays, and one location, marked with a blinking red star, drew my gaze. It was about 80 miles south, in a heavily fortified mountain range. The label was stark: National Biological Research Center, Level 4 Containment Facility. Maya came to stand beside me, following my gaze. That's it, isn't it? She asked softly. I didn't need to ask what she meant. We both knew, the place where this all might have started. The source of the plague that had ripped the world apart and, in the process, given me everything. My initial goal was simple survival. Eat, drink, don't die. Then it became about building a fortress. Now, looking at that blinking red star, a new objective coalesced in my mind, hard and clear as diamond. It was no longer enough to just endure the apocalypse. I zoomed in on the map, the mountain facility filling the screen. The source of the virus, I murmured, my voice a low hum that barely disturbed the air in the command room. Perhaps the answers are in there. The plan was no longer about defense. It was no longer about survival. It was about the hunt.